Okay, let's get started. Well, thanks for having me, everybody. Really appreciate it's a bit of an honor to present at your group today. My name is Charles Delfs, and I'm going to be presenting a bit of a quick talk on design patterns, coding design patterns, and we'll talk about what they are, why we should use them, when we should and when we should not. Also joining me is one of our team, Pearson, and he's going to be doing one of the segments on UX design. If you do have any questions, by all means, please feel free to jump in. And I have some questions for you, you folks as well. Just a little bit of background about me. Our team is Delfs Engineering, and we're located primarily in Toronto, but some of us are in the East Coast, and some of us are in Europe, and so on. So we have a virtual team. I'm originally an electrical engineer, and I transitioned from hardware into fitness industry, and then I got back into engineering again because that was sort of my true passion. And I was doing all kinds of coding and developing and consulting during those times, and then I started to take it on a little bit more seriously about 10, 12 years ago, and that's when we formed Delfs Engineering. Our main focus now is on web technologies, primarily mobile applications, progressive web apps. We're looking at AI in terms of user interface generation and code analysis and those kinds of things, some neat use cases for AI. And our main product is FM BetterForms, which you may or may not have heard about. And FM BetterForms is a mid-code, which is kind of a new term. I wouldn't call it a low code, and I wouldn't call it a high code, but it's definitely a full range of code development environment for the web. And our primary consumer of that is FileMaker developers, although we're starting to see some other users build apps with other backend databases as well. So we have a team of about 12 or so, and I've had the really amazing privilege of pair coding with literally hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating in this, hundreds of developers. Virtually everybody in our own community, which is around 300-400 or so, plus a bunch of other people as well. And we're going to talk about pair coding a little bit later on and its importance. So we'll get to that. So let's get started. So the thing is, what is a design pattern, and why does it sort of apply, or why you want to know or be able to at least identify what design patterns are? And they're basically known solutions that are pretty good for known problems, right? And based on that, we actually know quite a few design patterns, and I'll get into those into a bit. We're going to talk today about introduction to design patterns. We're going to go over DevOps patterns. They sort of fall into these categories: development and behavioral patterns, user interface and user experience patterns. And then we're going to look at taking some of that external technology, because a lot of this stuff has been really thought out for decades and decades, concepts, and we're going to see what we can apply right in FileMaker. We do have a bit of a limited environment in some ways, but we can smith some of these design patterns for that. I do welcome some open conversations and some questions and answers as well. So here's some patterns we already know. Separation model, right? How many people are maintaining an application that's still using the separation model? Yeah, there's a hand. So I can't see all the hands, but I'm going to assume some hands are going to go up, right? That was a big design pattern, and the problem that it was attempting to solve. Remember, the whole idea of design patterns is you're trying to have a solution to something. And the idea there was we're trying to manage deployment, right? We would be able to leave the data file in one spot and just ship out a new front end file. I won't get into all the pros and cons of the separation model, because I think that's almost a whole talk there, right? Things like UX patterns, master detail is a popular one that we see in FileMaker, because we got some new tools to be able to make those make those kind of interfaces easier now. Selector connector, that's an architectural pattern. I listed the separation model, just jumping back a couple. I listed the separation model as a combination of architecture, but it's really designed for DevOps. That was its real purpose there. And there's a couple other types of separation models as well. But selector connector, was designed for easy data access across from various contexts. And anchor buoy is a behavioral pattern. although some people might argue it's an architectural pattern, you can pretty much do everything without using Inker and FileMaker, but it makes it a lot easier for some people, it makes it a lot easier to develop apps. So that's an architectural, or sorry, a behavioral pattern. I'm not sure if is anybody familiar with the party model, or anybody not familiar? Maybe that would be better with the party model at all.
I haven't used it, but I've heard of it.
All right, so I'll just talk about it really, really quick. So the party model is basically a concept where you have two different entities and you have a relationship that's transient between those entities. And that transition, or the transientness of that relationship is governed by a record. So I have a client and I have a sales call, say, or something like that, or a sales agent. And every time they make a call to that, I'm recording that as a log. But I also might have an invoice and I might have piece of inventory or something else, or some kind of resource booking. And I might have a relational key in between there as well. So it's basically adding an extra table and more or less in between your entities. Another design pattern is single loop error trapping. Does anybody do any type of error trapping at all in their apps? So 1, 2, I think 3, right? So a few people, right? That's something that we do 100% of the time, right? Every application we have we do error trapping in there, but I'll explain why a little bit later. But that's another FileMaker kind of type thing, or at least the solution is FileMaker. So a really good design pattern, it has to have or solve a few things. It has to be you have to be able to reuse the code in some fashion. So that's saving the developer time. It's got to be readable. That means it's the next developer, U+1, has to be able to digest that code. It has to be scalable, meaning that some solutions just don't work very well when for example, how many FileMaker solutions do you know that don't work well when you start to get a lot of data, right? Suddenly things slow down a lot. So it has to be scalable in some fashion, and really, really important as well as it has to be maintainable. The maintainability of something is a combination of how clear the developer can to read the code, how easy they can upgrade or refactor the code. We were just talking about refactoring prior, and how easy that's going to be to swap those chunks out, right? So basically, so they can revise or version the code. Depending on your design systems or your design patterns and how you build your code, you may not be able to version anything, right? And I'm going to show you a little later on a way we can easily version chunks of code within our application. All right. So I'm just going to go back a bit here. So in FileMaker, like I think somebody was saying that, how do you refactor code without breaking things? Well, for starters, don't edit it live and you won't be breaking anything. You're working on your dev system, right? So that's the first thing, is that's a DevOps design pattern, is have a development, a staging, production server. Yeah, it's not always possible, but it allows these things like being able to work on your code and have stuff broken, right? What we tend to do, I think, from the majority of FileMaker developers I've met, is we tend to code something up and we're sort of in the sense of making some big script, and we got to add another relationship. So we add another table occurrence and draw a couple lines across, and we start to build this bit of a monster. And then we realize, well, we painted ourselves into a corner. So we end up sort of doing this. We end up drawing the door, painting a little door in the code somehow, and saying, oh, well, it's okay for this one particular case. So every time we deploy, I just have to run this one script. And I just have to go and fix this one record, this one preferences key, because after I deploy it, it's not right. And I fix it up each time. And then we get some technical debt in there that we're always kind of managing each time. And this is where things like design patterns and things like that can come in a little bit more. So instead of painting ourselves into those corners, we start to foresee those problems and then hopefully mitigate them. All right. So when do you want to use these patterns is really, really key. And I think one of the problems, if I could be blunt, with the FileMaker community is we don't cross-pollinate. We cross-pollinate great amongst ourselves in the sense of social, right? Probably a really, really tight social group. Everybody here knows me. I know most people and so on. So we have this really great connection, but we don't cross pollinate to other technologies, and we can learn so much more from them, right? So some of the things that we can really, really take advantage of is not sort of necessarily jumping on the bandwagon every time something new comes along, right? Selector connector came along, everybody started using it in their applications, right? And most of them probably didn't need to do that, right? Separation model came along, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and there's no purpose for it right now, all right? Maybe agree or disagree. So it's really, really key to decide what types of systems are in my opinion, are really useful, and they're going to have some longevity, and they're not going to have some of these other problems where they're not going to be reusable or they're not going to be scalable in the future. So if we can solve a recurring problem, a lot of us solve recurring problems by starting off with some type of a scrap empty template file. And that's the problem is we don't have any infrastructure code that's going to provision that environment for us. So we take a FileMaker template and we drop it into our thing, and it's got all of our favorite custom functions, and it's got all that kind of stuff in there. And we usually start with that. Or we take another solution and we clone the file, and then we spend a few hours and strip out all the crap that's not needed in there from the other client, and then we add our new stuff in, right? So we sort of solve that problem in that sense. We don't have, in other industries, they have things they typically call generators. And you would say something like npm, create app or something to that effect. And your app would start to provision and some questions. Hey, would you like this table? Would you like that? Would you like this in it? Are you going to use it with this interface or technology stack? What CSS stack you're going to use, and so on. And they provision this entire app, right? We don't really have something that can generate code. Geist Interactive at the time, prior to Proofgeist, Todd had kind of liked that kind of concept because he was cross-pollinating and came up with Generator. And I did a little bit of work underneath the hood in that in some code there as well. And the whole idea there is that you could sort of generate chunks of code from basic information. So data gets converted into code. And I think it's a great idea. Unfortunately, I don't think it got a ton of traction. It got some, but conceptually, it was really, really good because it's one of the ways that we can actually share pieces of code. So being able to do that is really, really important. Best practices are another thing too. We already talk all the time about best practices in almost every FileMaker group. Like, how many times have you seen somebody pull up a table occurrence graph and it's just a big mess, and oh yeah, that's my client. And then we show, oh, here I cleaned it up, and we want to show that, and that's some kind of best practice, right? Or we say, oh, we keep these tables narrow and instead of big wide tables, or we change the indexing or something like that. So we're kind of familiar with some of those best practices. The area I think our community is lacking in is actual coding best practices, like things like error trapping I mentioned earlier, things like commenting we don't tend to do too. And that may be because we're sole developers, a lot of us, or it may be because we just don't care. I'm not sure really. One of the things that really, really important about having some kind of known patterns, known ways of doing things is when you get somebody new to your team. Our team has grown quite a bit over the last 3 years or so. We tripled in size, and in the process of doing that, we brought on a lot of developers who knew nothing about FileMaker. They weren't from a FileMaker. They're from they're from a computer science background. And in the process of that, they had to jump into this code base. And the code base that they had to do, it basically runs our entire business, or it is actually our business, not just running it. It actually is the business as a software as a service. And it's a big thing to let somebody who's never seen FileMaker before, and we send them off to a FileMaker course, like one of these courses that, and they're pretty good. They give some basics, but they don't really teach them anything about the real heart of FileMaker. But that's okay, as long as your code has enough transfer learning, if you will, from other traditional coding styles. It's very easy for them to jump in. And now we have people who have never seen our stack before, and they can jump right into and be working on really, really deep level feature requests with very, very minimal training and without screwing something up as well. So what about when not to use a design pattern. So here's somebody who's got some kind of solution here, and they got the little Barbie table. And then I forget this guy's name, Mauby or Moby or something like this. He's like one of these Instagram guys. And their solution is to use a little table, and they go, oh, look, you can just use the table and you can rip this off. And he's saying, why bother to do that? My solution, look, he just goes and grabs a slice of pizza, right? And that's what pretty much everybody does, but not everybody, right? So that's a 95, 98% solution. It works great, and it's good enough. His solution, not this one here. This Barbie doll solution technically works for everybody. It works for 100% of the audience, unless you don't have any fingers, maybe. But it works for everybody. But his doesn't, because he's actually physically touching the bread. And if that was in a pizza shop and the person's handling my money and they go and rip the slice off and hand it to me, I'd kind of be a little bit grossed out. So here's two different solutions, kind of opposite end. One's over-engineered, and the other one is pretty practical. And the practical one almost always wins. And just like selector connector, maybe it's kind of over-engineered, maybe, but most of the time you don't need it, but there might be a time that you do. So it's really important to kind of really understand when not to just jump on a bandwagon and have that sort of code maturity to not just jump on the cool thing. You know, like, what do they call it? Is it what's the curve of confidence? The Dunning-Kruger curve? And as you're sort of learning, you know, we're learning, we start to realize, oh, there's design patterns, there's this, there's that, there's indirection, there's abstraction, there's all these really cool concepts, and we start throwing them in there. And I think that's really important, because that gives us enough maturity to know that we don't always want to use everything. And sometimes just plopping a field on a layout is okay, right? Until we have a problem. Like in engineering, you know, there's an expression, they call it engineering paradox or engineering triangle sometimes. And you can have, there's three areas on the triangle. There's quality, speed, and cost. And it's basically pick any two, right? You can have any two of those. And I think there's other probably little triangles that we could make as well with, you know, complexity, and sometimes just duct tape works fine, right? Duct tape works totally fine for tying up a, you know, bunch of rope or something like that, because it's good enough, but it's not good enough for other things. We need Velcro, or we need something higher level of technology. The last thing I think people also do wrongly is they will use something without fully understanding it. And I think we have to do that, but we should also be aware that we don't understand it. What I mean by we have to do that, I think, is in order to push your limits of growth and do things, we have to always have, like, you know, when you're studying math in school, there's always a problem that's like, holy, how do I solve this problem? And it's always a struggle to get to the next hardest thing, whatever the problem is. And that's sort of the learning process. But I think it's really important not to just go and jump into something without bothering even to ever understand the implications or see the beauty or the elegance of a solution as well. So that's really, that's kind of more of an opinion thing, I guess you could say there. All right, so let's jump into some of these patterns. I'm going to go through maybe about 15, 20-ish or so. Let's see how much time we have, 15 or 20 minutes or so of patterns. Just talk really, really quick about them. And if you're using any of these patterns, let me know, because I'd like to hear how you're doing that. I've tried to put these into things that kind of are closer to FileMaker at the top and sort of less close to FileMaker at the bottom. The first one is has been popular in the FileMaker news, is infrastructure as code, right? Basically using something like Ansible or Terraform or what's it, something else form that Amazon has. And basically what these systems are is they're a manifest of code, of requirements, if you will, and some other software runs that, connects to your APIs, and provisions all of that code. We actually, BetterForms, we use some infrastructure as code. We don't have our whole system but we do have some parts, some chunks that we do this with. Does anybody else do any type of fully automated provisioning? I know Jason Wood does. Anyone else? All right, I'll jump on to the next thing. Microservices. Wim Decor has recently been talking about this a lot, right? What microservices are is they're a very small chunk of code that does typically one thing, and that's it. and you call that, you pass your whatever you're doing onto that, and then you move on. If the code was a little bit bigger, you could consider it like an API to some company like SendGrid or something, MailChimp. But if it's a little smaller, it might just maybe compartmentalize the emails and then queue those up to send off to somebody else. So it does a smaller scope of things. Somebody mentioned that they do use, sorry, I just saw it flash up that they do use Terraform, but I missed the last half of your comment, so sorry about that. How about Docker? Is anybody using Docker? Right, a couple, right? So Docker has recently become really popular as well. We use Docker too, but we don't actually touch the containers at all. What Docker is a solution to a common problem. The common problem is I have a chunk of code written in language X, and I need to deploy that code to my laptop, Mac. I need to deploy that code to my Linux box running in my server, and I need to deploy it even to my Raspberry Pi. And I don't want to rewrite the code. And in fact, those devices aren't even right. They're like, they don't even have the right operating system anyway. So I can't install the code. So Docker is this unified container or receptacle, if you will. It's like an adapter that sits into your operating system, and then your container, which is your code, it has a manifest, a list of all of the things that goes in there. It starts with the operating system, and then it jumps from operating system to what software and what packages are going to be provisioned in the environment, depending on the language. And because it's a unified connector, doesn't matter what you put in the container in terms of code, it fits inside this Docker, right? I started seeing people saying, oh yeah, I got to learn Docker. And it's like, why do you need to learn Docker? You have 2 servers, right? And this is a classic reason, I think I personally have a little bit of a beef with. I think it's great to learn new stuff, absolutely great, but don't kill yourself learning it, because now you've just diluted what you're learning to support something for only 2 services. Most of these systems, not microservices, but infrastructure as code and containerization, the fundamental problem they solve is repeatability and compatibility. So it's okay to run a Windows server, and it's okay to maintain it yourself because it's pretty easy. You can't run 50 of them though, right? That's when you need that next level of technology. So you have a different problem. Blue-green deployment. This is one that we're working towards. We don't have this yet. We use all this other stuff, and we use Kubernetes and a whole bunch of other technology stack on top to be able to dynamically deploy and scale and do all this kind of stuff. But we don't do this last one, blue-green. And this is a little tricky one. What blue-green deployment? Does anybody know what this is by any chance? Don't Google. You've heard, red on blue, don't shoot, or, there's blue team and red team sometimes. Well, blue and green are the same team, and they're basically 2 servers. In FileMaker speak, it's running 2 FileMaker servers. One is being updated while the other one is live, and then you switch over to the updated one and you continue working on this and you update the other one. So you can switch back and forth and you have 0 downtime. Right. In order to do that in FileMaker, because we don't have a distributed database, we have to have some kind of synchronization in between those two databases. So we built our own. We're in the process of building our own sync engine, and it will keep those 2 or 3 systems in line, and then any one of them can drop off, and we can redirect traffic. So that's what blue-green deployment is. It's an architecture. We have 3 servers set up, live, dev, test. Right. Yeah. That one, the deployment mechanism, that's a DevOps thing as well, is to have a development staging or some kind of test 1, test 2. We have typically 2 to 3 test environments in our ecosystem, and then we have a production environment. And our production environments, we actually have various versions of code running in the production environments, because sometimes they're breaking changes and you can't deploy those. So you have legacy apps and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways of doing these kinds of patterns. And I just want to tell everybody about this kind of stuff if you've never been exposed to it at all. Just so you start to, plant a seed and say, hey, I got a client and this might solve their problem. That type of idea. Anybody have any other DevOps patterns or techniques or technologies that they're using? Just going to put my chat on this window here, which I can't see. There we go. All right. Okay, let's carry on. Oops. So we have architectural patterns, right? Architectural patterns are different than development patterns. Those are usually designed for getting your code from development to production in some fashion. Microservices is also an architectural pattern. Over here, it was designed to make these real services really, really easy to use. Over here, it's designed more as to remove the dependency of one developer managing the code. So that microservices, monolithic architecture, that's basically almost every FileMaker system these days. And some people are starting to have more integrations and more maybe Lambda functions. We have some stuff that scrapes PDFs, and it does some OCR, and it does some pattern recognition through state machines, all kinds of stuff like that. And they're running on Lambda functions, and we send data to them and get the data back because we needed to code that in a different language. So that's not a monolithic architecture, but a monolithic is everything's all in one, right? Everything's all in one sort of thing. That's the nature of FileMaker. We don't have a separate database and then a separate code and then a separate code base for the front end code. We have everything kind of all in one. Excuse me. Model view controller. Model view controller. This is one that I actually saw, a FileMaker app product, and it was built with model view controller architecture. And I thought that's really interesting because FileMaker as a product is model view controller all in one. The model is your data, your database, your connections between the relationships, your tables and fields. The controller is your scripts generally, although FileMaker kind of bypasses the need for scripts in to some degree as well. And then the view is your layouts, right? I don't think it's really necessary to go and build a model view controller FileMaker app, but there are some really cool takeaways that we can learn from this architecture. Because the concept of a control or the view is separate than the data, we can get some really, really neat optimizations. That means we can decouple ourselves, our front end, from our back end, and do different stuff on the front end, get all the data ready. And when we're ready, encapsulate it into one JSON object of such, and send it to the back end and process it, right? So that is a real big benefit that you can do. And that's something that you can steal away from that. Yeah, you can use things like OData or the data API, but I'm saying just pure native FileMaker, right? So for example, our product, BetterForms, we connect to FileMaker databases, but we just send data to the database and just get some JSON back, and that's it, right? It doesn't know what's going on in the database. So you can do something like that. Oh, sorry, my Siri's talking to me. And but you can do this with just pure FileMaker. If you have a FileMaker app and you don't want to be having these chatters back and forth for whatever optimizations. And I think I saw, actually, I think it was Vince's presentation. He talked about sort of an architecture like that, where you have a staging table or a staging area of data, you assemble all the data and push it to the back end. Fast or function as a service. This is basically like Lambda functions. And the same kind of idea. You can host your own if you want. I don't know it's worth it to bother going through and jumping all the hoops to host your own when you can host them on AWS for pennies. But I do know some people who have bothered to do that. Flux pattern I'm going to talk about because I want to give you some takeaways that I think that might be maybe some things that might be useful. So we'll return to that one there. It's a method of managing data. And something that everybody's probably used by now is some kind of REST API type system. And that is a design pattern. And it's not even a finalized design pattern because there's no actual standard for REST, but it's something that everybody's kind of moved towards, and we find it really simple. I just had the unfortunate privilege of quoting out somebody wanted to build a web app and they wanted to use our product, but they wanted it to connect to a SOAP backend. And that's just so nasty. It's just so nasty dealing with all the, no offense to the XML lovers in the audience, but to dealing with all the XML. She's going to hate me for that.
No, I don't do soap. I draw the line. No soap.
No soap.
No
yeah,
soap.
don't take that out of context.
It's not XML. It's something else.
Yeah, it's just nasty,
Yeah.
the whole thing is it was an evolution, right? It's an evolutionary step into coming up with something better. And we said, oh, this is terrible. We got to have something better. JavaScript's coming along, and it's kind of it's pretty clean. The text you can encode everything and send arrays and objects, and that's good enough, and make them deep as you want. Let's use that method and go there. Development process and behavioral design patterns. I think these are kind of interesting. Agile Scrum, and Kanban, and those systems that are used to get stuff out the door. That's a whole, we've got lots of professionals on there, but that is a pattern of management, right? It's a design pattern just the same. Somebody was mentioning about how do you work on code that is and not break things. Test-driven development is another design system or development system that that's really, really popular, but it's not popular in FileMaker because it's really hard, right? It's actually really hard in any environment, although some people love to write tests, and if you can find one, keep them and pay them lots, I guess, because nobody I know likes to do that. But the concept of test-driven development is you write a test, and let's say you're going to make a script. And it's a little bit hard because FileMaker is this integrated stack thing. But let's just think of a script as just, I'm going to write a script that's going to create a record, and it's going to, in the process of creating a record, it creates 2 children records. So it creates an invoice and 2 line items, create simple invoice. And I want to call that script. So before I even start to write that, I would write some code that actually checks, did it create a script? Did it create 2 records? And do those records contain the right data? And I'd run it, and it would say, no, there's no code there to create it. So it failed. So that's the first step of test-driven development. You write the code and it fails, and no more until it just fails. And then you go back to the code and you say, go to layout, new record, commit record. And you go back to run your test, and it says, it's kind of half passed. You didn't create the children record. So then you go back again and you make, go to next layout, copy the primary key and blah, 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 and write the record until it just passes. That's the concept of test-driven development. I don't think this is something that will ever fly ever in FileMaker, because it just goes against the core essence of what FileMaker is, this fast, rapid application development. And it's not. Test-driven development makes exceptionally solid code. It makes code that you can, since the tests are all written, that means you can deploy with confidence. You just run your tests, and if everything passes, you push it out into production. I missed a really important one back over here. And let's just go back. I missed this one here. And this CICD stands for continuous integration, continuous deployment. This is the future of every application now. And virtually every company, everybody that you're using, all these online apps are using some type of pipeline here. So continuous integration means that me as a developer Charles, can make a change, and I commit that code. Right, that code is saved. It goes into a script or does something, and FileMaker goes into a script anywhere else. It goes into probably GitHub, gets committed, and then somebody else, Andrew, goes in and makes edits some code. Now my code went into production, and right away we start to test that code. We run automated tests on it, and then if the code passed, it goes on to the next stage. If it didn't pass, it gets rejected, and it comes back to me, and I left a comment, and I'm not supposed to leave a comment, or I left a debugging statement, or I put a pause in there because I was, doing something, and it would keep coming back to me until it passed its set of rules. Continuous deployment means now, once that code is committed, it goes into a test cycle, and typically those test environments are built up using infrastructure as code. That's what ours does. It builds up a little environment, and it provisions all the stuff, all of the Docker container, and then it builds stuff inside the Docker container. Then it runs the code, and then it finally can actually test itself. And then when that is good and that passes, it goes on to the next step, which is typically like a staging server. So you may have something that automatically deploys to staging nightly or on a regular basis. And then once the smoke tests and your testing person goes through and says, yes, everything really is good, these we didn't miss anything, then it finally gets shipped automatically into the production. So there's no, we're going to release this, we're going to release that, we're going to have the V1.2 release. It's just continuous, ongoing all the time. So really, really hard to do. But if you can get there, it's incredibly beneficial because you can push out these edits and bug fixes. We have, with our product, we have like 4 code stacks roughly, and stacks of like 4 code bases. And in those, sorry, I'm just going to read that. And in those code bases, some of them we can push out way quicker than other ones just because of the environment. So. It's Agile is actually the methodology for management. Continuous integration, continuous deployment is the methodology for the code itself. So in many ways they're the same, I guess, but you don't call this Agile and you don't call that CICD. Here's a really neat one. And this became popular a little bit, and you're starting to see more people do this, is separation of concern. So the concept of separation of concern is basically that you separate the certain things of either I have a separation of scope right below it, either concern or scope, and they're slightly different. Separation of concern is, for example, I might have a file, 3 FileMaker files. One file is purely database, and that's it, no scripts. The other file might have all scripts, and that's like kind of a controller-like file. And then I may have a third file that has all UI, right? This kind of stuff in FileMaker doesn't lend itself perfectly, but other code systems, it works kind of quite well because you can separate those things because they are separate. The SQL database, for example, right? You have to have a separate code base that's sitting beside it anyway. But you can have separation of concern in FileMaker still, because you don't necessarily have to have this big monolith and everything all in one file. You can have multiple files that work quite well as long as your code can have the right APIs in between them and it can communicate, and there's not all these kind of crazy dependencies and things like that. So you sort of compartmentalize your code. Separation of scope is just a little bit different. You've probably seen files like this. These are things like, oh, I have an invoice file, and then this one's my billings file, and this one's the accounting or whatever file. I guess it's all accounting. And this one's the personnel file, and this is our contacts and so on, and they have them in different files. It's kind of, they're all the same sort of concern in some ways. They're all data, but they're different scoped. The data is scoped different. We don't do any of these ourselves. What we do is we do feature toggling though. So the concept of feature toggling is, how do you push something out when it's half done? And that's really a hard one in most environments, because sometimes those are half-breaking changes. Most of the time you can develop parallel code. If you have a folder of scripts, 7 scripts that manage MailChimp, and you say, we don't want to use MailChimp anymore, we want to use Mailgun to send our emails out. You can develop a similar parallel folder of scripts that do Mailgun, and you don't put the button, or you hide the button that says send with SendGrid or MailChimp, sorry, and send with Mailgun. And you hide that for all the users except your testers or whoever. So you do that feature toggle. Does anybody do anything of any feature toggle at the moment? Anything like that? Or do you just tell the person, hey, Jennifer, can you just not click on that button until I get it finished? Because that kind of works too.
We tend to do it by security and who can actually see what.
Right, privileges.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. And that works. I think that works pretty good. That's something we can 100% do really easily in FileMaker, right? We can hide it. We can have, the layouts are kind of cheap and so on.
Also a good way, if you have code, roll it out to one person and then roll it out to a group, incremental rollouts, if, so you get a little testing in there.
How do you control, what technique are you using to have person A be able to use the feature and not person B?
If get account name.
Right. Okay. So you're just hard coding that group or the privilege set or something like that. Some unique identifier to the person.
Yeah, you might be pair programming where someone is like, okay, when you run it, it's going to do the new code. Everyone else is going to run it in the old code. If it works for you, you could theoretically expand it, by by privilege
Yeah.
set or by
Very
a list of accounts. So yeah. it's
Yeah.
good.
So the next one's pair programming. And pair programming is two people staring at the same screen. Sometimes person B is looking up stuff in docs, but for the most part, sharing the same screen, working on the same chunk of code. Does anybody do that?
Yep.
I only do that with web stuff. I haven't done it with FileMaker.
I can't emphasize how good. If you're a scatterbrain like me, probably not, but if you are, this is the absolute best way. If you're totally capable of doing stuff, but you just never get anything done, grab somebody else on a call. And I've made this offer open. Only a couple of people have taken me up on it. I'll pair code hour for hour with anybody. I don't care their skill level or at all. It makes no difference to me. And they don't have to know your code. This is the beauty of pair programming. They don't really have to. You could pair program with somebody who's not even a developer, because what if 95% of your mistakes are typos, right? They're like syntactical things and so on. So as long as somebody's looking at your code, they'll catch a lot of the stuff. The fact that they're looking at you, they'll stop you from going and checking your email and jumping to this and hitting Slack and doing all these other things. So it's crazy. Pseudocoders, exactly. It's crazy powerful how good pair programming is. I don't know if you need to do it all the time, but if you can get like I pair with everybody on our team all the time. And typically we started off about 2 years ago and we said, okay, everybody's got one day. I pair with them at least an hour. Right. And then it turns out that established kind of a culture. And now they just book calls and, hey, I got this problem here. I want to have a look at it. And we just do it together quick and say, yeah, great. While you're here, have a look at mine. And we just do it naturally. It became natural. Super valuable. So I can't express how valuable that is. What about
Charles? I think you touched on it a little bit. I just want to kind of emphasize one of my favorite things to do is pair program with a customer where they have the domain knowledge and I have the hopefully FileMaker knowledge, and you put that together and I don't have to go through any bureaucratic email. It's like, okay, well, what's my business logic? Bang, bang, bang. So not just with another programmer, which I like doing, but with a customer who knows what they want. And then I'll just get it all done in real time.
That doesn't scale to a team, though. I'm going to tell you right now, there's no way that'll scale to a team. You have to have some kind of statement of work and scope out the whole project and stuff. Otherwise,
I do it with customers all the time when I'm talking to someone who runs the division.
You do it, right? Can you do it with 5 of your team, 5 of your employees? Can you do that?
Oh, we also do the code review thing, which I think is your next bullet point.
So yeah, code review is different, right? Code review is taking somebody who has the same or higher level of knowledge as you, and they say, hey, can you look at this code? And you explain to them what it does. And they look at it and they don't really, I guess, have to have like better understanding of what that particular process is, but they can look and say, yeah, you kind of not really, your variable names aren't, here you use counter and here you use I, and over here you use J. And then you come back and say, yeah, actually I and J are not really nested. So I'm just going to, we don't have really a memory problem anymore like we did in 1971. So I'm just going to actually use counter and I'm going to call it invoice count and I'm going to call it line item count and I'm going to change that. And that's where code review is really, really valuable because we get too stuck and too in love with code. I do think as far as the development of the app and those kinds of things, you should be probably almost every company is going to be working with somebody who's the knowledge expert in that. But I'm not talking so much about the scope and exploring the app. I'm talking about writing code, right? And this code may not be for them. It may be something for internal. All right. I'm going to flip things over to Pearson. Pearson is our product designer. And he basically is the first person that when we do any consulting, whether it's internal project or external project, first person that everybody comes across. And his sort of job with us is to really flesh out the essence of what somebody's trying to do in an app. We often get stuck and throw all kinds of crap on the screen, all kinds of first name and last name, all these different things when we didn't really need to. This field doesn't need to be editable, go into an edit screen or whatever. And he distills all of that. He's really, really great at doing that because I'll come up to him with this cool widget and look at how these things fly around when you hit these sorts. And he goes, yeah, no. and he pushes back on that stuff. So we have sort of I have an internal rule. I never push back against the product designer because they actually think about this stuff as a user. So I'm going to end my share here, and we'll flip it over to him.
Sure, thanks a lot, Charles. I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. I'm going to introduce myself and a little bit about what I'll be talking about here. So as Charles was doing, he was talking about design patterns in code. I'll be talking about design patterns in UX and UI, and talk about three main ones that I'll get to and explain why they're useful, how they can improve the apps and interfaces that we're creating. And yeah, let's just get into it. So who am I? I'm just a guy on your screen right now, but my name is Pearson Huguenin. I studied global business and digital art at the University of Waterloo for a couple of years. I ended up getting my Bachelor of Interaction Design from Sheridan College. And just as a little extra tidbit, I have a little background in film production. I used to do a lot of freelance videography, film editing. So my whole life has been very focused around using computers, using a lot of different types of software. I also have like a background in graphic design, so I'm very familiar with the Adobe suite, using all kinds of interfaces and software. It taught me kind of a lot about the other side of UX, which is being the user end, and identifying what I like in certain applications, what doesn't work. I can point at certain websites and say, these guys clearly don't have any kind of UX team in their company. Sometimes it's really obvious. Sometimes, sometimes I can come across like a really great user experience, and it really tickles my heart a little bit when I can appreciate something like that. But beyond me in my personal life, I'm the UX designer, product designer at Delfs Engineering. I create meaningful and enjoyable interactions between the users and their digital products, whether it's a service or a system. My primary goal is to enhance the overall user satisfaction and usability by designing intuitive and efficient and hopefully aesthetically pleasing interfaces and experiences. And it's all in the name, user experience. That's what it's all about. It's just trying to create the best time for the user of your software. But to get into a little bit more detail of what is UX, I like to think of it kind of as the psychology of design, whereas the UI, the user interface, is more the actual front end of it, just making it look pretty. So in UX, you're focusing on understanding and enhancing the overall experience of the user while they're interacting with digital products and services. It encompasses a broad range of factors that contribute to how the users are perceiving and interacting with your product. So some of those key elements would be user research, and that would be learning about the client or the client's users and understanding what are they actually looking for, what do they need in this software. The interaction design, that's all about what are they actually clicking and touching, and how do I make that usable and informative. And accessibility is a big one that a lot of people aren't too familiar with, and that's just ensuring that all of the applications and software are usable to as broad of an audience as possible. So anybody with visual impairments, hearing impairments, anything like that, we want to make sure that the internet is usable for everybody. So there's a lot of factors that go into there, but that's a whole other topic in itself. Now, what is UI? UI stands for user interface, which focuses on the visual and interactive elements of a digital product that users are directly interacting with. So UI will encompass things like styling of the visual elements, designing the layout, looking at the typography, making sure that it's legible and readable for anybody. We all know there's certain typefaces that are more pleasing to read than others. What some people don't know is that there are some typefaces that work better on print versus on web. So there's a lot of intricacies there that could really affect the user interface. Now, I'll get into the specific design patterns that I'll be focusing on today, and that is responsive web design, calls to action, and overall familiarity. Responsive web design is just ensuring that the interface can scale seamlessly with the size of the window that it lives in. Calls to action are meant to guide the user to the actions that they want to do, and also the actions that you want them to do. So that might include, signing up for something, or telling them, hey, look over here, I'm trying to sell you something. Look at this area, and that would be a call to action. And familiarity is just making sure that you're not making or forcing the users to think too much. You want to use language and concepts that they're already familiar with, so that everything makes sense to them. There's very little need for them to think hard about what exactly is happening in front of them. So to start off with responsive web design, or RWD, responsive web design is an approach that prioritizes the user experience by creating websites that adapt and respond to the different devices and screen sizes. So here on the right, you can see this photo here. It's the same article, but on a big screen, what we'd call just a desktop screen, versus on a mobile screen or like a tablet. Obviously, if you shrink the screen size down, some things are going to have to move along with that. Sometimes that's the typography, you need to shrink it down. Sometimes it's images you have to scale down. Sometimes you're changing things entirely, changing the navigation, hiding it all into a hamburger menu in the top left. And all of that revolves around the consistency, ensuring that across all devices, it's maintaining a coherent look and feel. The user isn't looking around for something they saw on their desktop, but now it's hidden on mobile, or maybe it's stuck behind another element. We're trying to make sure that everything is cohesive and can scale properly with the size of the screen. And so that kind of ties into accessibility, ensuring that people with disabilities can access and interact with the website on different devices, including those with assistive technologies. So just making sure that it's optimized for readability and legibility and operability across different screen sizes, devices. There's some people who aren't using a mouse the way we normally do. Maybe they're navigating with their keyboard. So making sure that elements have a focus ring around them if they're, selecting tab, trying to get to the next button, making sure that they see what they're supposed to see. And that ties into the readability and content presentation, which emphasizes the readability by adapting the website's layout and typography to fit those different screen sizes. Next is a quote that I that I really enjoy from Bruce Lee. Funnily enough, it actually applies to what I'm talking about here. And we like to think of content like water. You put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into the bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. And so what we think of as, what we think in UX is the content of your software is like water. It's going to fit into all of these different things, no matter the shape or the size. And that's just a little tidbit that I find entertaining about responsive web design. Next is the calls to action. So a call to action, or more commonly seen as a CTA, is a vital element of user interface design that prompts users to take a specific action. So you can see here in this little image here, very common. You've seen it on all software. You have the pill button, or a square button, maybe a button with rounded corners, but it's very concise. It gives you an action, and you have your eyes are drawn to it because it might contrast the rest of the web page. So you're prompting these users to look at these things, whether it's for signing up for a service, making a purchase, exploring further elements of the website. CTAs are there to guide the users through their desired journey. And so, figuring out that journey through user research, you're talking to the client or maybe some potential users, asking them, what is the user journey that you're trying to get through? And that will allow me as the designer to help create visual elements that can guide you through that interface. So you want to make sure that these stand out, often using contrasting colors and prominent placement to draw attention. You want it to you don't want it to blend in with everything else, obviously. This is often achieved using the contrasting colors, changing the size of it, making it prominent in its placement to draw the attention of the user. You also want to be concise. You want to keep it short, direct, to describe that action. You want to clearly communicate the benefit of clicking that button. So telling someone to get started will indicate to them, this is how I begin my journey, or show like a big button that says buy now. They're not going to be looking around for how to purchase something. You're going to be giving them what they want very quickly. So some very classic examples of this are from Netflix on their login page, or I guess on their main page before you sign in. It gives you a big red button, watch free for 30 days. It's giving it to you right in your face, prompting you with an offer, making it very clear, contrasting against that dark background and the white text above it. Next, you have something like Uber, who, when you're already on their app, you're looking through the types of cars you're trying to get a ride in. That big black button at the bottom is telling you this is the confirmation button. This will take you to your next step. And lastly, for Amazon, against the background of like a very open white background, you have these two buttons on the right. Make it very clear that this is how I add this to my cart, or this is how I do this secondary action that they're trying to show to me. Just making sure that these calls to action are visible, they're not hidden. You want people to see them because it's going to help them through their journey, and it can help you invite people onto your service, like for signing up for something, offering them something. You want them to see those. It's almost like your advertising interactions. Next is familiarity. So familiarity plays a big role in UX because, like I said, you don't want people to be thinking about what they're doing. It should come naturally. So that means speaking in the user's language, using words, phrases, and concepts that are familiar to the user. You don't want to use kind of business jargon to a regular user. That kind of comes up a lot in some of the apps that I'm designing. Sometimes we're working with clients that are in a very focused, very specific vertical, and so I try to use the language that those people would understand. So something like when we're working on an app for film and television, we might call the actors the talent or something, using that language so that they know exactly what you're talking about within the context of this interface. Along with the icons that you use, the iconography, they're only good when they can be understood. So you don't want to use, and that comes up sometimes, is we have maybe clients or people who want to use more icons, more visual elements, but some concepts are just borderline impossible to represent with a single image. It's not bad to use icons, but sometimes if an icon is a little too abstract, you might want to add a little bit of text next to it just to give context as to what that icon even represents. So what I've shown here are just some very common, very easy to understand icons because they follow real-world conventions. So matching our digital designs with real world concepts can help give the users context as to what they do. So these are easy to understand, and it's funny because I'm sure all of us, I was kind of on the cusp of the floppy disk, so I am familiar with it, but I know a lot of young people are not familiar with the actual physical floppy disk, but everybody knows this is the save button. Same with this folder. How many 10-year-olds or high schoolers are using physical folders anymore? But we all know that this icon means that I can put something in it. Same with the phone. I don't know anybody who has a phone that looks like this anymore. Even my parents, we've moved on to cell phones in our house. But this still means, everybody knows that this means making a call. So following these real-world conventions can help give context to your interface, but they have to be understood or easily understood. Maybe if, for example, if you're using you want to use a phone icon and you're trying to be a little fun with it or a little fancy, and you use like a rotary phone icon, the younger generation, that might not translate to them. and it'll work for some people, but it won't work for everybody. So keeping that in mind when using this kind of iconography or visual elements in your designs will really go a long way with the literacy of your application. So as more examples of this are switches. You know, these on-off switches, super common. Everybody knows what they are, but they started off as a real-world concept. You know, flipping a switch back and forth on or off. And same with these sliders, very common. Everybody knows that moving that dot in the middle increases or decreases the value of whatever that slider is attached to. That comes from, I know these from soundboards, you know, changing the volume or the levels of your mix. It all comes from real world examples that have been translated to digital. And from that transition, the digital version has become its own language. People understand what this is just by looking at it. So keeping everything familiar, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You want to make sure that people just know what they're doing right off the bat. So that concludes everything that I wanted to talk to you guys about. But I just want to say as a final thought, there is so much more to know about UX and UI. These are just some simple tips, some generic principles and patterns. But I really encourage everybody to do you know, a little bit of their own a little bit more of their own research, and you don't have to take 4 years of school like I did. There's a lot that can be learned just from the internet. The Nielsen and Norman Group is a fantastic resource. These guys, I can't remember their first names, but Mr. Nielsen, Mr. Norman, they are essentially the grandfathers of UX design or the UX principles. So they have a really good list of what they call their 10 usability heuristics for user interface design. And one of those I think I covered, it ties into the familiarity aspect of making sure that your digital interface simulates or represents real world examples. And they have 9 other heuristics just like that really help give you an understanding of what does it mean to have a good user interface. Another resource that I really like to use is called uxtoast.com. It's very simple. It's made for easy learning, and it teaches the fundamentals of UX UI design. They show they have some articles on UX laws, some principles that describe some of the psychology behind why certain designs are made that way. For example, one of the laws, I won't get too deep into it, but talks about how the abundance of options can actually restrict someone's ability to make a decision. So if you're giving them the option of, you know, maybe think of like a restaurant menu. When they have 100 different things, it's hard for you to actually pick what you want because there's so many options. Sometimes I like to go to restaurants that have one page of meals or of choices. Makes it a lot easier for me, makes it a lot easier for the user when you're not throwing 100 different buttons or options at them at once. So I really encourage everybody, if you are interested in learning a little bit more, checking out these resources. They've helped me a lot. They've helped. I've recommended these to clients before. So yeah, I really hope that you guys took something out of this presentation, and thank you for allowing me to speak here.
Awesome. All right. Okay, so that was great. Thank you, Pearson. So we can't just walk off and say like I know UX and just build stuff. That might not stop us though.
Yeah, you can go ahead and do that, but
yeah. Let me know how it
people
turns
who know
out.
will know.
Yeah. I'm always afraid to show you stuff. All right, so I wanna leave you guys with some design patterns that maybe you can use, and I've kind of broken them down into 3 different levels, maybe beginner, intermediate, sort of, I don't know, more intermediate, advanced, whatever you want to consider that. So I got 4 different things here, and I talked about pair programming and code review already, so we'll really just do with the 3. The first one is a generic data store, and this is something that's really low-hanging fruit. And it's something that anybody can add like within seconds to their app. So basically the problem is, and remember all design patterns are designed to solve problems in some kind of fashion. Various sizes, I have various sizes and shapes of data that are needed in my system. Like these are like value lists and a bunch of street addresses and some choices and stuff, some kind of stuff that we'd normally throw into a table, but it's an auxiliary table. It's not like your daily data. It's just there to act in some kind of supplemental fashion. So you end up adding all of these things in, and you've seen all kinds of apps, and you open up the Command Shift D, and you see the tables, and it's like 2 records in this one. What's that? Oh no, we need those records. Those are used whenever I do X, Y, Z, and so on. So the solution is stolen from document database design architecture. So I'm going to try to relate these to where they came from. In a document database, all the data is stored in some kind of hierarchical manner, typically looking like JSON. For example, Google Firestore, MongoDB, they're document-oriented databases. So we store the data into documents. And let's have a look at what that would look like here. And we'll just kind of jump to a quick example here. Move that off there. Who knows what kind of unintended consequences if I touch that will be. All right. So I have this is just a scrap FileMaker table, nothing really going on in here. But what I've done is I want to be able to, at any point in any script, access some pieces of data. And those data can be anything. It can be a template for an HTML email. It can be a prompt for AI service. Actually, that's one of the things that we use. And it can be just a bunch of values for a value list and so on. So I've created a table here, and it's a pretty straightforward table. And let's jump into seeing what it's doing here. So it's a very simple table. It's got the default garbage in there, the creation and the created by, and I don't care about any of that stuff really. I really only care about a couple things. I need an ID, of course, because you just should. And I'll just preach here a little bit. IDs should be called IDs. They shouldn't be called anything else, but prove me wrong. And I have an ID owner, and it's sometimes you can call it ID entity, but it's just basically some kind of handle, unique ID. It has to be unique. And it just references this particular table record, and then I have a chunk of data. And you could put a container on here too. I could put a container on here as well if I wanted to, and then I can access the container exactly the same way. All right, so that's all that's in my generic data store. Let's look at some actual records here. And this first record, it says Friday Live. That's our meetup group. I posted a link to that if you're looking for more sort of content to consume. There's some videos and things like that too. And this one here happens to have a JSON array. And in this case, there's a bunch of objects of whatever they are. It's like, looks like, some old and new methods or techniques for publishing to the web here, Lasso and then whatever. And I just need to access this because maybe every now and then I need to edit it. Maybe once a year I have to add another table in there for some tax table or some weird thing. So I can just go in here and I can make the change, whatever I need to do there. And I just do that. I don't need that fancy interface because it's really a developer thing, right? But I want to be able to access this data from anywhere on my web app. So I've added a custom function in here, and you can download these custom functions from our example file. And the custom function, some of you guys are already probably using this. So basically it's a execute SQL wrapper. That's called get column. And it basically returns this when this equals that. That's it, right? You can look at how it works. It's just, select this when that equals that, or where that equals that. And so I want to return my data where my ID owner, not primary key, because I can never remember those things, right? So I'm going to put a friendly name in there because it's still unique, is some value. So the value I want to put in is Friday Live. And you can see I just pulled my data up. Now, what the takeaway here is this could be programmatic, or it can be calculation based, or whatever you want to, however you want to access it in FileMaker, but it has no context, right? There's no external burden. The SQL queries, it's not a join or anything, so it's quite performant. We do a lot of, we built tons of dozens and dozens and dozens of apps like with concepts like this, right? So that's one thing. So you can use a generic data store. And then I'll just monitor here. I got another one here. And this one here has a list of street names, same kind of idea, totally different types of data, but doesn't really matter to us as long as it's data. You can put JSON in there, and there's my street names, just the same. And I think I got one more in my value list. That's it. I thought I had a JSON object. This one is, right? So that's a really, really low-hanging fruit for getting rid of all of that extra stuff that you're throwing all over your app. Sorry, did somebody say something? All right. So that concept, and incidentally, we have another custom function called getColumnAsArray. And it's exactly the same, but it'll convert all of those pieces of items into an array. So if I won't take these individual items, but if you had just this in here, it would, and the next record had Main Street, and the next record had North Street, it would create the array of those. If you have an object in here, it'll create an array of objects, and that's really, really powerful, right? So that's a really, really cool low-hanging fruit, super, super easy to use. You can get that demo file from, I'll post a link in the chat. But otherwise, just email me and I'll drop you a link if I forget to. All right. So that's a generic data store. Any questions about that at all? Somebody wrote, James. Hey, James. He wrote, get custom, one of the most useful custom functions they've ever run across, coupled with an as JSON calculation. Okay, let's do that one too. Let's do that one. This is really cool. This is crazy powerful. Okay, this is a really, really simple technique. It's another low-hanging fruit technique. And in many ways, this is a design pattern because it's a way of, instead of the old design was to throw a bunch of tables on, the new design is to put one table and put varying data in here. And it can be deep JSON, it can be anything you want. You want to get an image, you can grab it as base 64 in there and encode it in there, whatever you want to do, right? But let's look at another one. James mentioned something here. I have a table of events, and this is a typical beautiful FileMaker layout. And I have, API first design for FileMaker develops it. This is just basic talks that I've given. And you can see there's a bunch of fields, and there's some stuff in here and some stuff in here and so on. I have another key up here. It's a Boolean, and it's called is published. So that one's published. This one isn't. That one is. And let's make this one here published as well. There we go. Right. So I just have some data, and I want to fetch that data because I want to send it out to another service, maybe to my WordPress site, maybe to my BetterForms app, whatever it's going to be. So in order to prepare this data, there's like date and name and there's an image URL and so on. I've added a custom function, I've added a function, not a custom function. And this is a great design pattern, and it's I call it the as JSON design pattern. I didn't invent this one, but I'm pretty sure I use it the most. That's what it feels like. And basically here's what it is. It's a function. It's an unstored calc. Now that may be a little bit small, so I apologize. But I'll tell you what it is. It's JSON set element. And then it has just the keys, which are the fields of the stuff that is of concern to me. All right, so I can create several. I can create like a list version, which is very narrow. And I can create a detailed one, which is really deep and goes to related records as well. So this one has an ID, date, image URL, name. Name, it has name and date, actually. It looks like it's a concatenation here. Description and a cost. All right. Now, to fetch that, I do exactly the same thing as what I did before. If I wanted to fetch one of them, I could use the get column. And because this as JSON calculation represents the entire, it's a JSON encoding of the entire record, just by fetching this one field, I effectively get all of the fields, right? And that makes it way easier to handle within your app. So let's grab all of the publishable ones. So this one's get column as array, right? It's the same API here. It's not an extensible API, though. I'll talk about that in a sec. So column field. So the column field I want to get is my as JSON, where my is published flag, where is that? I'm squinting, is, wait for it, 1. That's terrible looking. So let's just do a JFE here. Learn your keystrokes. And boom. And there, I just fetched all of the data from all of those records, already ready to hand off to my API, to my third-party service, to my web app, whatever I want. And I did it in literally one line of code, right? Crazy, crazy, crazy powerful. All right, so that's a neat design pattern, a way of fetching data instead of go to layout, perform, find. And what's beautiful about this is if for some reason it fails in what it's finding, if I put something like a 2 here, because there's no 2s, it fails safely, it fails gracefully. It doesn't leave the FileMaker developer on some random layout or anything like that. There's no security risks. It's really, really, really sort of locked down in that sense. All right, just by design. So that's one thing. Let's jump to something else here. There we go. Keeps going back to the beginning here. All right. So the next one is what I call API first design. And this is not I'm terming it that here, but it's an industry thing. And basically the concepts of API first is that everything you build has some kind of interface so you can reuse that chunk of code. Right? We don't have easy ways of creating modules that are really, really nice. The closest we got right now, and the best one we got, I think, is an add-on. But it's not too bad. It's coming along, I guess. But we can at least copy and paste super easy, right? Or we can just call the code and we don't have to reference it twice. So the whole idea, the main concept of API first design is that your structure of your scripts, all your functions, custom functions, and your calculations, and the way you access data is with an API mentality. So you're thinking about fetching the data, even if it's from your own database. The FileMaker way is go to layout, perform, find, and then you're on that layout, right? API method is go fetch that data with using some kind of SQL-like wrapper custom function like I showed you for most of the time. And now you have the data as a variable, right? And you do something else with it. Right. So what does that mean in terms of a system? Couple really, really key parts of this. And it's really like a whole, it's a whole couple-hour talk, really, I think, on its own. But main idea here is the code is in chunks, and each chunk of code, which is typically a script, does a small thing. Sometimes custom functions, you might have a custom function that's custom functions concatenate name, and then another custom function that does concatenate name with an age. And all these variations. You may have some dependency, so you can do that with custom functions as well. It's the coding style is kind of functional, so every chunk of code does something. The chunks are testable. This is a key one. We don't normally do a lot of testing by nature in FileMaker, but we do have. It doesn't have a lot of talk right now, but the Carbon framework for testing is actually pretty decent. It's a really, really decent way of just running through. And all it's doing is it's running a script and it's checking it for a known response. That's it. So that's a nice way you can test the code. So it's testable, which means it's less likely to break. And you don't have to reinvent your system. You can start using this kind of methodology in your code, right, moving from day one forward. And the biggest thing I mentioned this earlier is junior developers can jump in and they can start hacking away in code because it's one small chunk of code, 10, 20 lines. It's not these massive 800 line scripts or anything like that. I'm not going to talk about multi-tenant architecture just yet because I think that might be take us over here. I want to talk about not so much about the scripts, but I will talk about, I'm just going to dive into the scripts just a tiny bit. This is one of the applications. Pearson mentioned an application that he was working on just briefly, and it was a movie industry for the film industry. And this is a list of all the APIs that are in that file. And we update this every now and then. I'm just going to zoom into some random ones here just to give you an API. API find orphan annotations. Marks all orphans with is attached as false purposes to find annotations that may have been orphaned. So it basically looks for these delinquent mini missing records. Here's some other one. API delete sets. So it's one small function. This is a script. This relates to a script, and that's an actual script name. And accepts and deletes an array of sets. So you pass it an array of sets. These are ID sets. So like a movie film set, and it will delete them. Also searches for set occurrences, records, and also to delete. So it kind of give you an idea. You have all of these building blocks. And when you're building something with this API, when you're building something with this API first design, this concept, normally when you code, you get cruft, right? You start coding, your app goes up, And then this is like the crufted, we'll call it crufted, and this is time here. And because you get more cruft, you go and create a new script to do something, and it goes up a little bit, and then a new one, and it goes up until you can't manage it, and then that's your technical debt level, right? And you can't go any further, you can't carry it, you have to refactor, and then you do the same thing again, or you get another developer, and you got higher tech debt that you can support, right? API first design kind of has this kind of a curve to it. As you build things, there's more effort that's gone in initially, but this point here where you transition to a really, really efficient method, because there's only so many things you can do in your database. And most new functions, new features are just combinations of those existing scripts and apps. So that's kind of the concept there, that the fundamental concept of API first design. Not sure if anybody's got any questions on that. All right, I'll show you, I think I have another app, and I'm just going to jump into, I'll jump into some other things in just a second. I want to talk about custom functions because I mentioned that earlier. Typically, you write your custom function. This is a custom function that shows a modal. I'm using this one because it's one of ours. It's pretty simple. It's just basically wrap some JSON. And this is how it started. It started off like this, and basically you can get an idea of what it does. It shows a modal, and it has a title and a body, and that's it. But then we ran into problems with that, right? So you end up starting to add, well, we wanted a type because we want to show it's a success modal, it's a failure modal, it's a warning modal, and so on. And you start adding these extra, can you see that? No, you can't see my thing. You start adding these extra parameters or arguments onto the custom function, right? So next time you write any custom function, add one more argument and call it options. And you'll never have to change that custom function again and go through and figure out what's using it. And you can version it just the same, because these options is just a JSON object now. And now it's fully extensible, right? Do this with all your custom functions going forward, and you'll never have to like have these version 1, version 2, and every time you have to change everything. It makes it super, super easy. It doesn't break stuff. You can update the code. It's awesome. All right. Oops, let me go back to that again. Sorry, let me just fast forward here. There we go. Check this out. This is an actual table occurrence graph, and I figured I'd bring one too to the party. You know, everybody's got one of these. This one's actually pretty good, I think. He's using like a naming conventions and like T1, T12, or whatever it is. You can tell it probably came from that one of these starting solutions or something. And I can see everything at a glance. So he's not bad, right? The developer is a really, really bright guy. And this is how he built it. And he tried to keep everything clean, but you still have this a little bit of stuff in the middle. Oh, well, it's manageable, right? He rewrote his app. He rewrote the app, and he started it. He says, I'm going to write this. This is a vertical application. So it's a software as a service. And he said, I'm going to rewrite it, but I'm going to use this API first design. All right. This is his new table occurrence graph. All right. So he went from this to this. And the main reason here, right, the complexity has to go somewhere. But the main reason that this is so complex is because these are all used for context, right? It's FileMaker, so we have this concept of context because we have to render the data. But if we fetch the data without context, we can render it any way we want in any interface we want, and we don't have that binding there. So now you suddenly have this super easy, right? You have a new developer to your team. Which one, and this is not even bad. This is actually a dream if you got one of these clients, right? But which one's going to be easier for them to work on? Incidentally, the stuff on the right is a selector. That's another design pattern, but it's not using selector connector. It's using the selector concept, and it's using that so that it can have he has a script in here called a universal CRUD, and it basically, you just pass it a table and a JSON object, and it just writes the data, and it puts it into the right one. Same thing for deleting. He loads up some IDs. He creates a new record here, loads up an ID. These are all delete related, and it deletes everything all at one shot too. Right? So that's that concept there. I mentioned that already. And how are we doing for time here? I want to talk about one more pattern for today. And this pattern is called a flux pattern. And I don't know if they got that term flux from like electromagnetic field flux, or if they where they originally termed, but it came around 2010, 2015, somewhere in that range. With Facebook, they introduced this, and Facebook has got this. They're developing this big app, and they have a whole whack, hundreds and hundreds of developers, and each developer, one developer is building a like button and all the widgetry to go in. Another developer's this, another one's putting the picture and the emojis and all the stuff in there. And I know when I go and I hit the thumbs up like button, I know the little number of likes needs to increment. Okay, so it's a little thing. So I need to, it's right now, it's at 5 likes, and I click the button. I need to tell that thing that's got to go to 6 likes, but that's not enough because I need to send it to the server. So I send it to the server, but what if somebody else likes it? All right, then another one comes down from the server, and now it's 7. Right, and it changes. So the Facebook ran into some real big problems in here. So they came up with this pattern, and in truth, I don't think the concept is just theirs, but the main idea is that data only flows in one direction. Right now, we're not building these reactive interfaces like Facebook is. And if you use an application like BetterForms, we take care of that already for you. So you don't have to worry about that kind of management. But the concept of this is something that we can take away. So subscription management, if you've ever dealt with Stripe's API, it's pretty easy to deal with. But if you have somebody in accounting who's going directly into the Stripe thing, because there's all kinds of analytics they need to see, and then you have somebody who's signing up in your app, and then you need to track that data and to control their access to the data. So there's like 3 entities at work there. And how do you keep that all in alignment? So this is where the flux pattern comes in. It's a little different than Facebook's implementation, but it's the same concepts. And basically it means the changes go in one direction up to the top to a controller, if you will. In this case, the controller is Stripe. And then Stripe calls back to your database with a webhook. And that webhook, this is kind of an intermediate level here. The webhook hits some kind of dispatching script, and you have a handler for subscriptions and a handler for plans and a handler for customers. And Stripe's API automatically creates those webhooks, and it'll call your app and give you all the data that you need. So that data acts as a mutation into your database. So whenever you need to make a change, if somebody goes into this panel and make a change, or the credit card's expired, or something happens, then that is automatically pushed into your application. Right? Whenever you make a change, you go into Stripe's checkout or Stripe customer portal or Stripe's API, and you push the change up that way. So there's a circular sort of pattern, if you will. Right? What this does, it's very simple, but it makes something that's really, really hard to maintain otherwise. It makes it really, really easy. So that's a great way of solving problems. Now, maybe it doesn't have to be Stripe. It might be your WordPress MySQL database. And you may have to look at how you're changing stuff in there. Maybe it's doing some kind of webhook back or something along those lines. I am going to pause here for just a second, and I just want to see. I did have a couple other little things that I wanted to show you really, really quick. Here's another pattern that we can use in FileMaker. This is for error trapping. And if you're using like a single loop error trap, does everybody know what that is? There's been people who have talked about that before. Or does anybody not know? You can always just type refresh me. Right. Basically, the gist is you create a single loop in FileMaker and you exit the loop when there's an error. So it skips all of the code because FileMaker doesn't have a really good ejection system. But in our use case, we have FileMaker, we have these other 3 code bases, and there can be errors anywhere. And if a developer writes an error in his FileMaker database, if he's got a credential between connecting to the database, if their database is offline, if the connection to their database has failed, there's maybe about 12 points of failure along there between that and a web application. So we needed to build an error trapping system. So we basically take right from FileMaker scripts, any script that the developer has, and they can throw an error, and we pass that error all the way up. And that's the shape of an object. This is a simple object, error code and error message, and that's it. And we pass that up, and every piece of code looks for that error, and it says, oh, if I got an error, pass it up. and we keep passing it up, and that passes up and passes up through our orchestration, through our data centers, all the way through our DNS. There could be a failure there, and it goes right into the client side. This is in the browser. What happens if there's a problem in their browser? There's a failure there, and so on. So we have to display these errors at some point. They have to display, and they have different handler here depending on how they work. So this is kind of sometimes they call this bubble up type of method for error handling, and it's used in virtually every language. But it really lends itself super well to FileMaker, because you basically you say exit loop and you create an error object as your result, and every script exits, and as soon as you call a script, you check if it errored and you kick out of that one, and it goes all the way up as well. Maybe that's a whole separate talk, but that's something that you can really low-hanging fruit there to add in. Talked about the design patterns, and I think that is pretty much it then. I hope there's some little tidbits that you got out of this, and I hope there's some tidbits that you can share with us as well. If you want to get a hold of me for any reason, like the pair code, you can reach me at C. Delfs at Delfs Engineering. Our product is FM BetterForms. We have a monthly Friday live meetup group. We have a pretty good attendance, and we have sometimes some pretty good guests, some really exciting things, I like to think anyway, but slightly biased. If you're looking for some of our repositories, you can get them at GitHub. If you search for, okay, that's totally wrong. Delfs Engineering, that's totally did not spell my name right there. So, and DELFS, and also there's a link in the chat for our Friday Live and all of this information as well. All right, thanks guys. Does anybody have any questions about anything?
No, it's excellent.
I don't know if it's excellent, but you know, but it's working.
I mean, I guess maybe an observation, Charles, and that is, I wonder if some of the things that you mentioned are hard to do in FileMaker are because we just don't have a great way to move code around. Or
Yeah.
You know?
The separation of concern is one of them, right? So the thing is, we almost have some decent ways of doing that, because right now an add-on, as soon as you add it into the project, you can basically put a folder of scripts in, and you can remove that. You can yank it out pretty cleanly, and the custom functions that go along with it. So we do actually have a pretty decent way. The friction still, though, is you have to create the add-on. And the other piece of friction is you have to, even harder, is you got to create all of the stuff that configures the add-on, right? That's usually quite often more than adding just a little JavaScript web viewer and putting some stuff, is you got to have, you know, okay, what table do you want? And that means I have to figure out and get the FileMaker developer data and figure out what the scripts are. And, you know, it's a pain, right? It's a pain to do that stuff still.
Yeah, I mean, the add-ons still don't have a way to update them either.
But you can yank them out, and if it's a pure, you shouldn't be touching anything that's inside that package, in my opinion, right? Anything I drag onto the layout, I plug it in. It's a folder of scripts. Those scripts should be written well enough that I can just call them. The problem is FileMaker breaks the call when you call them. So now you need to perform script by name and have them so that they won't break. And the configuration needs to not be stored in the add-on. It needs to be stored in some kind of generic configuration thing so that it persists when you drag a new one on as well, or you keep the table.
Thank you.
So I think it's a pretty good start, and I think it was relatively low-hanging fruit, because they basically just added an ID to every XML tag, and then you search for those and you yank them out. So
this is a question for Pearson, actually. Where does the line get drawn between, like, how can I say it, like desktop processes that we want to automate and a tool where they're already to a certain extent using it, but not 100%? Like, how would you go around, like, the discovery process of really getting buy-in for updating those physical processes into electronic processes?
That's a good question. Oh man, I don't know if I have an answer for you off the top of my head, but I think it would just come down to talking to the users and understanding what exactly are they, what is the tool that they need, and can it be simplified into a digital form? If I'm understanding your question correctly, is converting the physical into digital in those workflows?
I guess I should say desktop processes, like processes that happen outside of FileMaker, for example, like in Adobe or something like that.
So is that like how do you convince the stakeholders that the ROI is there, or even just the effort to do that, the inertia to make a change?
A little column A. I mean, I think the stakeholders know that there's better ways to do it, but I don't know. I guess.
Is it ever in a scenario where you can add something, like you can do something, you add some small low-hanging fruit, and it's like, yeah, this is great. Okay, add another one, and then you can start to develop that inertia, maybe?
Possibly. It probably depends. Where it's workflow specific would be my guess, but.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is user interviews and stuff like that.
Yeah, user interviews, but I mean, if it's about kind of convincing the switch or like the conversion, I would say finding metrics that can be measured. For example, like if there's something on the desktop that you want to put into an app, and trying to convince someone to use the app instead of the desktop, have some metrics to show it's actually faster this way, or people enjoy it more this way, or it's easier to learn this way. Because there are circumstances where maybe someone who's already experienced, who's been using some old software for years, they will be fast on that old software because they're used to it. But you will be faced with the learning curve of introducing a new person to that old software, rather than bringing that new person into new software and they get it right off the bat, or they can learn it, pick it up a lot faster than they would had they started with the old software.
Well, you talked earlier about like call to actions and stuff like that. So like with FileMaker, I think a lot of the database designs end up being very function driven. It's like you're here to print an envelope and stuff like that, versus where a call to action might read a little bit differently. Do you have any good resource material for like how? Well, my first question is, does the call to action only apply to like marketing, and you see it with checkouts and stuff like that? Are there other opportunities for it?
Yeah, so call to action, like I said, it's you're guiding the user to perform an action that they want to do or that you want them to do. So it sounds like in your case, it's you're calling them or you're guiding them to commit an action that they want to do. So if it's, how do I send this document? Probably the big blue button that says send document, making that obvious, exactly, just guiding them to the results that they want.
What about the concept of having more than one primary button? Is that kind of a scenario like that? You should have a primary button which indicates that's what you should be doing?
Yeah, and I think you can have multiple primary buttons. It really depends on the hierarchy of information that you want to present. So if two buttons have the same level of importance, then there's no reason to make one look less important. You can make them both primaries, but if it's between like a main action, like everyone will be sending this document, you will have to send this document during this workflow, you're going to make that a primary button. But maybe a secondary action, like what else might you do? You might save it to your desktop or something. Yeah. Maybe it's like an action that not everybody's going to use, but is still useful. You might put that beside the primary button, but tone down the visual aspect of it, so it's not, because that's not the main focus. The main focus is the primary button. Any other secondary action can be kind of live in the same area, so that their eyes are already drawn to that area with these actions, but you really are just trying to highlight what is most important on this page. What are you trying to do? We know you're trying to do this thing, so that's why we made this button very clear.
Beatrice, I think, has her hand up.
Tony. Tony has his hand up for.
Beatrice can go first. I've talked a lot. I want to hear what Beatrice has to say.
Thanks for being gracious. James, I think the question is, how do you get people to buy into what you've done? Is that kind of the focus?
Well, I think you've probably put the nail on the head. Or the hammer
Okay,
on the
so
nail.
can I suggest? So this is straight from the human interface course at Stanford. If you want people to buy in, you develop prototypes. They express a need, or you see a need. You design prototypes. You do not design just one prototype. You design at least 2 prototypes. You lead them through the prototype, and you ask them if it works for them. And you may tell I feel strongly about this, but you need to get the buy-in. You need to get people to say, this is exactly where we needed to be headed. They sign off on the user testing on the prototype. My recommendation is the prototype be as simple as possible. I would use Balsamic or something incredibly simple that does not look like FileMaker at all. And pass the prototype, more than one prototype past them. They may say, neither of these prototypes work for me. Go back to the drawing board. This is the reason why. You finally get a prototype that they can sign off on, and then you implement that. And the implementation basically means you signed off on this. This worked for you. We're going to work this through into production. And that's the easiest way I have found to get people to buy into a change that they might be a little bit reluctant about spending the time. They do have to invest the time in testing the prototype. But it basically means that you have buy-in. And I think that's a really significant aspect. And thank you for listening.
TED Talks by Beatrice.
Love it. Sorry, James, I
TED
missed
Talks. TED Talks.
So let me jump in. Very enjoyable presentation. You guys put like a ton of stuff on the table. Got a couple quick riffs here. One, on the separation model, don't use it a lot, with one exception. Relatively recent in our coding is a faceless logic file. Very, very useful when you want to, for instance, create new records without changing your layout or any kind of context that you have in your user interface. You know, just calling a script that passes, let's just say JSON, to a faceless logic file that uses the separation model, changes context, makes new records. Also could use it for queries. I got 2 more. Master detail came out in FileMaker 17. There's another pattern that we've used for a long, long time, which is the inverse. And I'm betting a lot of people use this. You know, with a list view, you can put fields in the header or the footer, and it is, you know, pretty much the mirror, and it works pretty good. Even a portal, if you like. Third and final topic for now, party model. Huge fan. The one that I'm going by is, or as the source for that, and there could be other people involved, would be the Len Silverton book, Volume 1. It's either Chapter 1 or Chapter 2. I think of it as a domain pattern. The phrasing would be party of, you know, businesses, you do business with a party, let's say. Party might be an individual, a corporation, or a subdivision within a corporation. So I think that's where the word party comes from. And it is in the section about CRM. So I try with the CRM systems that we build to build them much as Apple does, where Apple will, in their address book, which is obviously a simple implementation, they'll give you a little radio button that say, is this a human being or is this an organization? Anyway, those are just 3 riffs, but really terrific presentation. Thanks for
Thanks, Tony. So that separate file, the headless file that you were mentioned there, really that's a separation of concern model, right? Because the concern of that file is to do your CRUD actions, create, read, update, delete. Maybe not read, but at least create, update, and delete actions. And that's a really good, actually, it sounds like a really good use case for that, because you can call that script. It doesn't blow your context out.
Yeah.
I guess the downside is you have an extra file, but that's not really expensive either, really.
And often you need that for web calls that you don't want any interface at all to bog it down. You just want your data.
Yeah, and actually Steve Winter does that.
Yeah.
What he does is he has a web interface file, which just has your table occurrences.
Yep.
And then he has his PHP file sitting in front of that, right? His PHP app. And then that file is more or less the original file with just the table occurrences, and you talk to that. And that way it also keeps everybody out, because if you're using the data API or the XML gateway to fetch raw data from the actual tables, those layouts are sensitive, as you know, Beverly, that you delete a record or delete a table, or sorry, a field off that, and suddenly your field's gone. So he likes to keep people out of that field. They don't get access to that record at all.
Yep.
Or that table or file.
One other pitch for the faceless logic file is I suspect that it's more performant, because unlike a user interface file where you often have to go change context and then come back with, as long as you're passing data pretty quick, you just go establish context, do what you got to do, and you're done. So you're only doing one context switch. And it also seems to be, at least in the platforms that I've done, it seems to do well in terms of windowing, because it performs, as far as I've seen, without spawning a window.
Well, where that would work really nice is using, if you're building any type of audit logs where you're using on-window transaction, in order to write those files, you basically have to break context, open up another window or something like that. And that's a real pain in the butt. But if you can do it programmatically through another script, and the script is already, like you said, in the other file.
Yeah, and I think, Charles, I
is
think it's a classic pattern, which we all do, which is you bundle up a package of data. These days, that would be JSON, used to be 6 fried rice, let's say. But, it's JSON 16 and above. You bundle the package of data and you send it. And then you pick it apart on the other side and you do what you got to do. And the less interface you have on the file that you're calling, the faster it's going to run. So good stuff.
Does anybody have use any like DevOps automation? For example, with Auto for deploying, that's a kind of a start. But the neat thing about Auto is it's scriptable. So you could coordinate that with other things. I'm just wondering if anybody else does something sort of along those lines.
We do bits and pieces of that, and we're starting to explore more of it. But yeah.
We have, in our app, we have to deploy the front end and the back end, and we don't have it purely simultaneous. Like I'll show you what I mean here. This is one of the team's apps here, and this is Andrew's app, and here's his development environment. He's got a staging environment. He doesn't have a production environment. And this is at version 15, and it's got a bunch of edits, and he wants to deploy those. Now, some of those, most of these edits here are all in the front end, but he might have changed according, like, there's some Christmas test. I don't know what that is, but it's a test app. So he may have made something for Christmas, and there might be some corresponding scripts. So I always thought it'd be nice to, to deploy. And if I want to deploy this to staging here, I always thought it'd be nice to deploy it. And at the same time, FileMaker will be deploying as well, right? Because for us, it's really easy to deploy, to roll forward, roll backwards, and so on. It's just creating a snapshot here, and then once it's done, there it goes, and now it does the deployment. But it'd be neat to have FileMaker do that as well. And I would like to see like the concept of version numbers introduced as well, so that we can roll forward and that's a big one, roll forward and roll backwards, right? So that's going to go to version 16 now. They're the same. right? But wouldn't it be nice if FileMaker could do that? You could roll back and you could just say, I want to roll back to where it was a few minutes ago. And it just did that. And now the app just went back. Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's like effortless when you can do it through code. But, you know, we're moving, this is moving, I don't know, half a megabyte, maybe max of data. You know, FileMaker is like, we might have a record that big, right? So, you know, there's gigabyte files. So it's a different story.
Yeah, every time I think about the rollback part, I always kind of get frozen in my tracks because of like the implications of like, oh, I'll put something in production, people have made decisions, they entered data and they moved forward with business. And now I have to roll back. Now,
I think
what happens?
Yeah, well, I know it's just a mess, right? But I think if you use like a red-blue type, blue-green type deployment where like how much breaking data, like if you think about it in stages, right? Right now we're doing some big major infrastructure updates because we got to update some things, but we can't update this orchestration software until we update these intermediate software that controls because the versions are too different. Like it's kind of like FileMaker, not compatible. And we can't do that one because of this one. So the whole process will take us a month and we have a whole plan of doing it and doing all of these jumps, right, to do that. And with data, it's almost the same thing. If you can make a code change, let's say we want to add a middle name field, but I have a field that's called full name. It's a calculation, and it would normally include this middle name in the future. I first have to deploy the middle name field and not have maybe some code that depends on it and get that into production. And then I have to deploy maybe my calculation at a later date. So I have to do it in 2 stages because I might have this broken effect between my 2 versions. And maybe I can push one out, keep data parity, and they can't use the middle name field in the old one because it doesn't have one yet. So I get 2 records. One's got I'll use my thumb as a middle name. And I've deployed, this is the original one. I've deployed this, but I'm not using the thumb yet, the middle name field. And the data is mirrored. So now this is live. Now I can deploy the one with the thumb, but the thumb that's actually engaged, and it won't break anything when I deploy it. So you got to go in kind of steps. So it's always, each step has to be backwards compatible. And that does require a fair bit of thought to do.
Yeah, great example. Thanks, Charles.
Unfortunately, we have to do that all the time because all of our stuff is super high available and you know, producing all these features. So does anybody have like management design patterns, like using Scrum, Kanban, Agile, whatever comes along next week? How do you guys do it? If you don't mind me asking, Vince? Like, how do you stay on track and on time and on budget and all that stuff? Is there like a
Well, I mean, it's really
secret?
No, it's not a secret. It's just it's team driven. So I think very rarely do we have any developers do any of the IT related stuff. So there's definitely like a focus of the team who does all the IT work and manages the servers and the updates and they get the, you know, like a little bit what you were saying about borrowing from other technologies. There's a whole way to structure work for that team. They just show up and they have a list of like, okay, today I'm doing this, and you know,
So
the
this
stuff
is
just gets scheduled.
the people who are doing this team. Those are the people who are doing the DevOps and infrastructure.
Yeah.
They're okay. So they have a list of change requests or whatever they are, and I need to provision this, update that, and so on.
Right, and
Gotcha.
a little bit like, you know, you were saying about pair programming, where you could pair program with someone and you don't even have to know the code. I mean, they just get a list and like, oh, I'm doing this, and they don't know much about that system or server. All they know is like, oh, I'm patching this, I'm doing that,
Right.
and they're highly skilled, and that's what they do. And more, you know, we've tried to do more of. Again, there's like a whole web team and there's a FileMaker team. There's also a Tableau team. within our company. And more and more, I try to bridge web and FileMaker teams to work together. However, it doesn't really ever kind of like the sparks don't catch and the fire doesn't burn. Whereas the Tableau and the FileMaker teams have more traction.
That's
for
very
some
interesting.
reason. And so, we embed Tableau dashboards into FileMaker, solutions, and then there's interactivity with the dashboard that takes you to the data that underlies, the process, or gives them insight so that they can take action, right? But I've tried to do more with the web team, but again, it hasn't happened. But yeah, we've used Jira, what else? Different kinds of processes, and some of them are more rigorous than others, where it's like agile. And I'm not, how do you say? I'm not certified agile.
Yeah, the Scrum Master or whatever.
Right. Yeah, the Scrum Master and all that. But
Cool.
there is, and again, to the point where we have dedicated people. There's one person who that's all they do. They manage the board, and I can tell you one experience we had recently, which was we transformed the experience for the team, where like 5 people on a call every week for an hour, very inefficient, where what happened is we transformed that experience to be the person managing the board, meeting the stakeholder, and going through the board and saying, okay, this is, you need to review it. Let's look at it now. Can you sign off on it? Okay, that's good. This good, and all this came up. Okay, I know the person to assign it, and then basically it just shows up in that person's queue, and it's like, oh, okay, now I got to tackle this, and it's a well-described thing to do, and they can reach out and ask more questions. But if they're familiar with the solution, they get what they need, they go and do it, and so it reduces the noise, and it's just completely changed the velocity on the project.
Yeah, I think you have to have a critical mass, I guess, right? Like, if a dev house has one or two people, they can sort of manage things themselves, and they can communicate the other person across the way. And then you get to that, the 3s and the 10s, and that's when it falls apart a bit.
Yeah.
Right. The 7 people, like, there's it's not enough for a project manager, and it's not enough to self-manage. It's too big to self-manage maybe sometimes.
Yeah.
But
but I see interesting challenges that we face, which is really trying to get the clients, the stakeholders, to understand the impact that technical debt has on, like, and this, even in those talks, like the go to conference talks on YouTube that I've been watching. There's some people trying to reframe what technical debt is, how it's defined, and all that. But really, it's a real thing. When you look at it, it's hard to describe, but it's really impacting when someone comes in, and it's rushed code is the worst, because then you're having to, oh yeah, they took this approach and then they didn't document it. I have to figure out like why it's this way, and it slows everything down. It's like driving into mud, and then all of a sudden, like, the cost is more expensive, the outcome might be worse, and so. But if you take all that out, it creates a whole other experience when you walk into a room that has code that's nicely organized, well documented.
Yeah, it's efficient to do that.
Yeah.
Our code base for our app is pretty clean that way. It was written from the ground up with that in mind. So we're pretty lucky. There's hardly any cruft in it, and I would say there's virtually no tech debt, even the technical depth. And but still, we had some front end stuff, and we had a developer a number of years ago, and you know, we use one technology, Vue.js, but we have available in the app, we have an older technology, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there's some technical reasons why you shouldn't use it, is jQuery.
Mhm.
And jQuery is not reactive to the data. Vue.js, somebody changes something in FileMaker and it just shows up on the web, right? jQuery doesn't. They have to do that. And they were solving the problems like that. And it's like, no, you can't use this. I know it's easy, but it's you know, for them, it was the same thing.
Mhm.
You know, they're just jumping to that easy thing and making a bit of, you know, messes here and there.
Yep. Yep. It's all evolving.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. Is anybody using any AI for code generation?
We've been exploring it a little bit. And I think you were there when, who was it? The guy from Sweden talked about ChatGPT and how.
Yeah. Yaron, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been using some, and because our code is really it's UI driven by data or data driven UI. We have I'll just show you really quick here. It's kind of a hyper sneak peek. I guess I'll pull it up though. We've been experimenting with some stuff, and it's pretty neat. We wrote a little AI assistant, and debug. See if I can find it here. There it is there. We wrote this little AI assistant, and it's so easy to do this stuff. Just ignore that just a second here. Just a second here. All right. Ignore this side here. And this is normally some stuff would show up here. So check this out. Okay. This is some code. It doesn't do anything. So I go over here. We wrote this little assistant, and I do something like this. I say something like, oh shoot. This is the dev version, and just yesterday I was working with pair coding with our team, Hassan, and we took this apart. He goes, oh, okay, I'll fix it tomorrow. Evidently didn't get fixed. But it's a little widget. It's a chat widget, and you have to almost take my word for it. But you have to see it. But basically the chat widget, you say, create me a sample JSON invoice with addresses, invoice number, some line items, all the stuff that would be in an invoice. Goes off, and this one's tuned for JSON, and it creates this JSON invoice. Then I go over to the HTML part, and I say, using the data in here, create an invoice. And it makes the invoice with line items. Like, it is pretty crazy powerful. Like, you just type it out, and then boom, you got the code. And then you replace that with your data, your as JSON from FileMaker is what would happen there. But yeah, like, it's just some really powerful things there. And OpenAI is just a month and a half, 2 months ago, they released functions. They call functions. And I don't know if anybody's checked these out. But it's a really interesting, it's a design pattern. What they did is they create like they call it, it's kind of in the technical terms, it's called a factory pattern, but they don't call the function, because then they'd have to, you know, perform some API call from their side. But what they do is they return the arguments for the function. So you say to OpenAI, I have a function called send email to customer. It accepts an email address, a subject line, and a body. The body is encoded as HTML. And that's what you tell OpenAI. Then you say, and you tell OpenAI, I have another function that's called search customers. It accepts a query parameter, and it will return a customer object. Now, that's all you need to do. So those two things in the back end. Then you say to OpenAI, AI, find customer Charles and send him an email for his birthday. OpenAI will execute that function that's find customer, because that's kind of what it's called. It intuits that it's what it's called. And it won't run the function, because the function's in your FileMaker thing. It can't run that, but it will return data that says, please call the function find customer using this argument. and you pass it into your find client script. You return the JSON back to OpenAI and you say, yeah, here's the next chat with my arguments that return my customer. Then it'll come back to you and say, please send this call out, send email. Here's the email. So it'll go back and forth between OpenAI and your functions that you've defined, plus your scripts, and it'll run stuff. It's pretty cool. If you get a chance to check it out, it's exactly the same way the plugins work in OpenAI. They work exactly the same, but the plugins are sitting on their side. But you can create something that will drive your FileMaker database with very low effort, very low effort to put in, and get really big gains out of it for that kind of thing. And you just have to describe what it can do. Tell it it can send an email, I can create a new record, whatever, call this API, do that, and then it'll come back, and then you parse that instruction out and you call the appropriate script. So it's pretty neat. It's called OpenAI Functions, and you don't have to look at this stuff, but they have a simple documentation on their outside, not in the main docs. It's actually simplified quite a bit.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Well, folks, I should get going, I guess. I don't know what time you guys kick around to.
Till we run out of stuff to say.
Right. Pearson, thanks for coming out. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for letting me speak. That was a lot of fun. Hope I taught some people a few things.
Definitely.
Do you think you have a whole talk in you?
I have a whole talk in me? I don't know about that. But
I think so. Pearson, hey, Pearson, you got 7 minutes, 12 minutes? You got 12 minutes, 17 minutes? He's
I need a whole nother meeting.
Yeah, no, you got lots of stuff. I mean, even just a collection of all the things that you present. He presents a UX Corner on our Friday Live every month. And that's like a 5-10 minute segment on various concepts and stuff like that.
Huh, that might be the best format. I don't know.
Does anybody use Figma?
Yeah.
Themselves?
No, I don't use it personally, but we use it. Right.
Because Pierce and I were talking, like, I've seen only one developer in our FileMaker community who is using Figma for design. But he's quite proficient in UI kind of design. He's got a pretty good eye kind of thing. But we were thinking, would it be beneficial to have like a multi-part series and say, hey, here's some basics in Figma for building stuff, or too high fidelity?
I mean, I could keep it simple. I think it's a really powerful tool, even for just the simplest of prototypes or wireframing. I really do like the prototyping feature in Figma, and I've used it a few times. But I think it is a really, really powerful tool, and it's relatively free for anybody who's just using it just for quick designs and stuff. Really good stuff.
Anybody have a link for that? Put it in the chat.
Yeah, I can put it in there. It's just figma.com, I think.
Oh, okay. We end up posting these chats usually too. So watch what you say.
Well, I want to thank you, Charles, for jumping in here. I know it was a little bit short notice, and the willingness to share what you know. And
we gave him a heads up over a month ago, actually. But
well, yeah, but then a week ago.
Oh well, Charles, you got a whole month of heads up. Wow,
I told Pearson last night, I think.
It's happening.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks again, Charles.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks,
never
guys.
forget.
All right, cheers.
Steve.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Steve. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
thank you.
See you.
I just like listening to those meeting sounds. People drop off.
Beep, 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 beep. I can't remember if those go in the recording or not.
If you haven't checked out the OpenAI functions, the stuff you can do with that is
Yeah, I was
pretty cool.
playing with Python, regular expressions in Python as well.
Yeah.
Like, it was showing me all kinds of stuff. Although it was, and then I asked it about a FileMaker. Actually, I had a whole talk on this, and it was making up stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, and I was looking. I said, "Wow, that function exists in FileMaker. Where have I been?" And I go looking for it, and it's not there.
What it
Hey,
does even
that
better.
function's not even there. You go, "Oh yeah, you have to make a custom function," and then it starts kind of BSing me for a little while.
Yeah, but they look real.
Yeah.
But you can give it code to analyze, and it does a very good job at that.
Yeah.
You say, what's this thing doing? And it's like, well, this is what it's doing, and he's using this technique and that kind of thing. It's pretty good that way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it seems to be pretty good at the Python and the regular expressions.
I built a little training bot. Let's see, what is it called? Is prompter prompt. There it is. And I built this little thing in BetterForms. It's just it doesn't have any backend. It just talks to OpenAI's API, and it's a basically you can pre-do your prompts. So if I want, I can create so I can go into this prompt builder and create a new prompt, and it might be something like write a letter. And let's say you want to tune your prompt, so you need to kind of come up with a prompt that's going to be suitable to put into your application. So basically the idea here is you delimit, you say, write a letter about, and then you would go subject. And now I get subject here. And then I can create these sample data sets. So the subject might be colors, and another data set might be weather. So write a letter about subject and now I can run that. And you can see there's the merge prompt. And then I can run that, call OpenAI and test it. And I can use it to kind of tune prompts on a, basically I can keep creating these kinds of things. I also tried to say, okay, I'm going to create my own ChatGPT. So I don't know if my key is in this one. Let me just see. One of the problems with, it might not be on this one here. I might have deleted the key. But what was I going to go with this prompt? Maybe it's prompt dev. Let me see this, or is it open? Yeah, that's it. Maybe it's a different one. It's just a development version. So here's a BF chat. It's just basically calling. It's the same chat, but it's calling OpenAI's API, and it's the same kind of an idea, right? And you can have a little conversation. It's just kind of a quick proof of concept how you could build something pretty easy. I thought it was kind of fun. But the idea of prompt tuning is really valuable, I think. That's actually kind of cool stuff. Especially if you have consistent priming of things. You're going to do marketing, you need a whole priming field that tells you everything about the business and the tone and all that stuff. You can't just say, write a tweet about kind of thing. So
an AI for AI.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So we don't really there's not a ton of tools, and everybody's just jumping on the AI bandwagon right now. Right. So
yeah, I think FileMaker, the code writing things, that the artificial intelligence stuff doesn't really apply to FileMaker because it's not text-based. So someone would have to both feed it underlying XML representations.
That's just it. You don't, because it is actually very good at code.
Does it
right?
write?
So
I mean, can it write a script that I can copy and paste?
If you could train it, it could create that. Like if FileMaker wanted to incorporate some kind of AI assistant into stuff, it is doable, because FileMaker as itself, it's an app. Underneath the app is a database of code, and that code is generatable.
Right. Yes. FileMaker could do that.
How does it learn about that, since it's not really?
You'd have to train it on stuff. You'd have to say, hey, here's this is an invoice layout, and then give it that. This is a contact layout. Here's another contact layout, and give it nice ones, not a bunch of ugly ones. Or here's a bunch of custom functions, and this is how you write custom functions. Start on that and train it on those. And it's like, okay, I get how the custom functions is. This is all wrapper. This is the real code, more wrapper around it. Got it.
Yeah, yeah. Speculate if FileMaker is actually looking at this sort of stuff, or Claris is looking at these sort
I
of
would
things.
think somebody has at least mentioned, hey, we can do this. Like it's not that much of a stretch.
You could, the custom functions you could write because they're text-based. When FileMaker, at some point FileMaker shipped a feature, it's so tiny, I don't think anyone uses it, like the script shortcuts or whatever. I have to go look it up because I don't use it. It's where you can designate, I think you can designate a single script step as being a favorite, which they did that at the time when other products like the Apple script editors would let you
Oh, I see.
have an entire block.
Gotcha.
And that was an opportunity that they missed. I mean, they implemented a feature which was ridiculous. Like here, you can add one line, whereas the correct implementation would be you can store in the application UI in the development environment a block that loops through records, or a block that loops through a loop, iterates through a list or JSON, whatever, or just add one more that does a standard find. Because that's how scripts are made. They're made out of blocks.
Check this out. Let me just find, like, it's pretty good at I'm gonna find a custom function that's quite complex. And let me just share my screen here again. Record, share. Okay, so this is quite a complex custom function. And just a second here. And I say, what does this FileMaker custom function do? Oops, it's going to ask me. I should hit enter. I meant to hit sometimes I just give one away because then I can do this.
Okay.
And all right.
Well,
Appears
let's see
to
what
be
it says.
designed for handling. So check this out. Okay, it appears to be designed for handling synchronization of data edits between a local FileMaker database and a web-based system. Here's a breakdown of its functionality, right, of what it's doing. Initialization, modify fields, pruning old edits. This function goes through and prunes the things. All of this is bang on as what this thing does, right? So I'm going to wait till it's done here.
In summary.
To track and manage edits made in records and FileMaker, ensuring custom functions provides design for data synchronization between a local file. And that's exactly what it does. All right. It's going to blurb all the same stuff again, but that's pretty good.
That is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's really good at reading this stuff because you don't have to know a language to be able to read it anyway. So you can kind of guess code if you got a little, some concepts.
Is this one that you wrote, or you or someone on your team?
Oh, that was my custom function. Yeah.
You wrote that one.
Yeah. It's part of a more in-depth synchronization thing. So,
hey Charles, I just noticed a new, well, it's new to me on Chat GPT called custom instructions. Have you seen that?
custom instructions? No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, go to the bottom left and click on your name.
Yeah.
The dots next to your name.
Custom instructions.
Yeah.
Customize your interactions. Oh, that's it. Whenever you edit a custom instruction, they'll take effect all new chats. Okay.
The reason I mention it is because I know you have to tell it all about BetterForms.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have a whole primer file for that. That's really cool.
So I'm just wondering if this also works through the API. That would be really big for you, I think, because it might mean less processing for each query or something.
Oh yeah. We use tokens, right? So we use like 500 or something like 200 tokens or whatever just for the priming of the prompt. Because it's like you're a JavaScript thing, you're using this, but we've even got it like how actions work in FileMaker in BetterForms. So we can even say, make the button blue, and when they click on it, run the named action, go to home page, and it'll spit out all click. It'll put all the stuff in there. It's really good. We got it's getting there. It's not too bad anyway. But this is really interesting. So is it maxed out? It's maxed out at 1,500 characters, so it's not really. and you don't have personas. That's the only thing, right? So this is great if I have one account for marketing. I can tune it up and say, this is the company, the voice, and all that stuff. But I can't do a separate one. Let me see. I think it's just that's marketing for me anyway. The only stuff that I would need. I'll check that out. And how would you like it to respond? I'm not sure what that is. What are your hobbies?
Like if you click in it, it gives you thought starters. Like, so for how would you like ChatGPT to respond? It says like,
Yeah.
formal or casual,
Okay.
and how would you want to be addressed? It's kind of funny. You could have it refer to you as
Yeah.
Captain Delfs or something every
Yeah,
time.
that's it. That's it. That's actually pretty good though, because that's one of the things that's really missing, especially if you're using it for a narrow scope work, like, I'm a lawyer or something like that, and I need to make this document sound better.
Mhm.
Instead of having to prime it every time, say rewrite the document, it's like, yeah, I got it. I know you do. So, I'm definitely going to put my priming stuff in there.
Over at DIGFM, they did a presentation, not DIGFM, FM Disc, the LA group. I think it was 3-4 months ago. There was a presentation by Russell Cohn, I think is his last name, about this. And my question was, could you take a YouTube transcript and the timestamp links that Eric is famous for implementing, best post-production in the FileMaker community, and could you feed it into the artificial intelligence and say, take this transcript, pretty it up, because it comes in as pretty blobby, and can you also cross-correlate it with the timestamp links to produce a useful
Yeah. There's actually quite a few services that have popped up to do that. And just this week, Vimeo actually even has something now that you upload a video, and to edit the video, you find your ums and ahs and, oh shoot, that's the wrong thing. I meant to say this. And you highlight the text and you hit delete. You edit the text and it edits the video.
yeah.
It's kind of a neat, it's pretty neat. Some really neat summarization stuff. I'm looking for one right now so that we can take our, 30 or so meetup videos or whatever we got,
There you go.
summarize them, categorize them, and put them, make them somewhat searchable.
Bingo.
Because there's tons of good information in it.
Yeah, no, that'd be a lot of leverage for the FileMaker community. I mean, there's all this content, some of it awesome, and but it's, after the video is done, it's not accessible, not searchable, and everything from under hood presentations with Clay, and on down. I got to give Clay, Clay's like, I want to know what Clay thinks about the code.
Yeah, right. So that's what you do. You say, what would Clay say?
Right. I mean, you wrote this code. I mean, how does this fucking function work? How do I optimize this? He gave a great opinion on the Charles, you talked about anchor buoy, selected, collected. We're not. Are we still being recorded? No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
Okay. I gotta say, selector connector. It's terrific experiment that maybe doesn't scale so good. But yeah, we talked about the relationship graph and the number of pathways and stuff like that. And I think that was in 2019. It was like the last.
Again, like anything, it's all about, application. Like you can take aspirin for some things, but you have to take ibuprofen for something else. Like I'm just standing here thinking about my sore back right now, so I'm projecting. But,
or meditation.
like selector connector, I don't really like the connector part, the thing that satisfies the UI thing, because we don't build any apps with any UI at all.
Yeah,
anymore.
we don't use it. We looked. Unfortunately,
Selector is good though.
there's some terrific stuff coming from the very same people who invented selector connector. Some amazing, awesome stuff. I don't think selector connector was the winner because it doesn't seem to scale, and also I never really caught the use case for it. I thought the relationship graph that you, Charles, that you showed earlier was that seemed to be a very targeted implementation.
Exactly. And that
Yeah,
scales
that's nice.
beautifully. That scales really, really well because you're not having some kind of crazy, you're not basically hanging all your tables off of every other one of your tables.
You don't want everything to touch everything because it does not scale. It scales. The factorial math on that is horrible. I had a conversation with Clay. It just doesn't scale.
Yeah.
Factorial
Like,
math kicks in.
we use it for a CRUD and we use it for a deleter.
Right. For like
And,
segments of the relationship graph, not the totality.
yeah, like I'll show you here. So we use it there. So let me just zoom out here for a second. That is our entire app,
Yeah.
right? That's the whole piece of software. It's pretty simple, but it's not really simple. I mean, it has a ton of code in it, but the graph is simple because we don't have any UI. So there's no reason to have all these anchor buoys. In fact, there is one hanging over here, and that's to serve the web. And that's it. And so we do have kind of technically the web UI, but otherwise we use it's just all regular relationships, basically very simple things. I don't think there's any repeats. 50% of the tables don't have any connection to anything because we're just pulling data from them for whatever reason. Event log, for example, here, or templates. These are just, templates that are template of a website or something like that.
Mhm.
So it doesn't need to connect to anything, right? And then we have the selector and then a deleter. And all the data in the entire app is written through a script, so it's programmatic. And we call the script, we pass it a table, and we pass it a JSON object with the keys that are the field names, and it iterates over those. And it sets the fields and it creates a new record.
Cool.
That's it. So it's very, very, very simplistic. And honestly, we haven't touched this in like ages because you don't need to because everything's there. The odd time I can't even imagine what the last field we created. Let me see the last table. Notifications. Okay, this was a year ago, the last time we created a table. And that's just for in-app notifications. And that's a new feature that's not even released. Right. So we hardly ever have to touch things because that stuff at that low level doesn't change all that much.
It looks clean. It looks clean and it looks, appropriately performant.
Well, like any app, we had a problem where we were finding that something needed optimizations. We had some related piece of data that was unindexed.
Mm.
And it was like, typical problem. And it didn't manifest until a couple of years in. And then it's like, holy cow, this thing's getting slower and it's getting like really slow now. Before everything was fine. And then suddenly it was fine until it wasn't.
Yep.
And, now we just use an auto enter calc and it pre-caches that deeper data and
Right.
stuff.
A little flatten it out.
Yeah. Tickle it once and, whenever the child's right, and that's it. So solvable, manageable.
Cool. Let's see, Eric Matthew dropped something in the chat. You're going to have to let me know when you want me to cut off the recording, or it might all end up on YouTube. I haven't said anything embarrassing. I think that I was looking at some code that I wrote today, which was a riff on Ray Culligan's logging thing that he released at the time he did the FileMaker Bible. And some of the code that I wrote 7 years ago, there was at least 3 different things I was doing different. Nothing catastrophic, just some things that were overly verbose, a little bit of an abuse of the set error capture script step, a little overuse of that. And I think what we're doing all this conversation about is code. We're all making each other's code better by these types of conversations.
I think there's, yeah. I have an old drag and drop implementation that I made by hacking some XML years ago.
That sounds interesting. What's that about?
It's called Better Drag and Drop or something like that. I forget what it's called. And it's basically a drag and drop that uses containers because you can drop into a container. It doesn't look like a container, and you drop up and down, and you can use it for sorting, and it as you
Oh,
drop,
okay.
drag stuff around. I mean, but there's so many, like something like that is so easy to implement in JavaScript now. Like I think let me just see if I have
Yeah.
one.
So Charles, so for instance, you're talking about like drag and drop portal rows, moving portal rows around using drag and drop kind of
Yeah,
deal?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, or rows in general, but yeah.
Maybe a list view also.
Yeah.
There was someone else, I'm not going to mention their name because I implemented it. A lot of people implemented it and that just didn't scale. I had to take it back out. Jason Wood did some nice riffing on auto enter stuff. And I have to say, not all my fields have the appropriate auto enter to make sure they're 2 digits or Boolean or and you mentioned drag and drop. There is reasons to protect your fields from drag and drop. There is Todd Geist had a really good blog post about how to protect from drag and drop. Nice
Yeah,
feature.
yeah.
But if you drop it into a field that's got a checkbox on it, unless you have the proper precautions, you could have data in that field that you don't even see.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you can make the code more solid.
But it's so easy now to implement this stuff. Like this is just a JavaScript editor that I wrote years ago. I never finished it, but the idea was that you can just do live code editing. So this is your another browser, and I have my data here, and if I have cat, dog, and let's go bird, let me just move this over here. I can cat. Let's change this to. So bird, you can see boom. So it's live. I actually already have a
Right.
bird. Right. So go back to cat. And, just by the inclusion of a quick library, you can this is actually built in, this one's a view app, but you
Yep.
can use any technology you want. Like if I jump back here, Bootstrap, lesson 1 here, where is reactive? Alpine. Here's Alpine JS. This is a little plugin type of call library. There's this in here. And
So you wrote your own, for practice, because there are, correct me if I'm wrong, there are web pages that let you do.
there are, but this one here, I can take this web viewer and I can paste this in right in FileMaker. Right. So I can stick that in live and do live coding in FileMaker. Underlaying this app as a whole was written in BetterForms, but what it's doing is it's another app. It's nothing to do with them. And the idea being that you could stick it into FileMaker and then you could do your live debugging and everything in there.
Okay.
So
I did. I don't know if you saw this. I think it was either for San Fran, this group, or for LA. I did a text editor in FileMaker, kind of the inverse of the plugin, where I'm editing a text field, and the web viewer is next to it. So I'm building HTML using text functions. If that made sense, using the get selection, and
get a
scripting.
CSS.
Not using that one. Just if you highlight a block of text.
Oh, I see. Right. So you go something like this, and
Selection
then
start.
you're fetching that. Yeah, gotcha.
And if you do that, and if you highlight a block of text, then you get the text before, the text after, using the get active field contents, get selection, the pointers of this and that. You can highlight a block of text, and you can click, and then you got a paragraph tag or an HTML structure, an anchor link and whatnot.
Right.
And I've been using it to build my HTML emails that I send with an Apple script that makes use of Objective-C. It's an Apple script Objective-C, so that I can, from FileMaker, I click a button and I've got an HTML email in FileMaker, in Apple Mail client. So I'm not going through SMS, I'm not going through an API, I'm going to the local mail client. Apple script Objective-C. Founded on the web, Shane Stanley. No, it wasn't Shane Stanley. It was one of the guys. He was the AppleScript evangelist over at Apple until recently. So it is amazing what you can do in FileMaker, in the web, put them all together.
Has anybody used shortcuts that much? It's pretty powerful now to do
The
stuff.
iOS thing. What is shortcuts?
Shortcuts is an app on iOS that basically is a bunch of action steps, and you can do things like, copy, paste, run JavaScript, call an API, and you can actually write little programs in it. I haven't, but I've seen some neat stuff. Fabio,
yeah, that's what I was gonna. Fabio did some stuff.
Yeah,
with it.
when I was in New York, he demonstrated that, if you recall. He was using shortcuts, and he was using shortcuts to query FileMaker.
Yeah.
But just little things like that. You can, follow OpenAI with it, stuff like that. It's kind of nifty.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, ChatGPT, I think I applied for a subscription. I didn't hear back from them. Does ChatGPT cost money at this moment, or is it free?
Yes. Yeah, to have that the better one, yeah. $20, but it's like crazy cheap compared to what you're getting.
Yeah, 20 a month.
Like it helps me, write a decent, like you get an irate client or something and you need to write a rebuttal or, you can.
For somebody
Just
that's
copy.
not using the API, I don't pay for it. Would I be benefiting by paying for it?
You get, yeah, for GPT, yeah, you're getting GPT-4 versus 3. And 4 has really good multi-step reasoning. So, like, for example, you can say something like, you could say this, if I'm going to build an object that is got to go down to the depth of the Titanic, what type of pressure would that need to exert back into the water? And it multi-step reasons it out and it says, okay, it's about 5,000 psi. Okay. Now, if I'm going to build a tube of about 8 feet in diameter,
Just for example.
Yeah, for example, right? And I'm going to make that out of tungsten. How thick would the walls have to be? And he says, well, based on this, and this, and the tensile strength, and like it's pretty good. Like it's like holy cow.
But 3.5 can't do that?
Not as well, no. It doesn't. Like you can say, if I said, here's some 3 objects. Here's a coffee cup, a laptop, and a what's something that's semicircle, like half moon thing. I'm looking for something small. A bottle. And I need you to stack them up so that they're in a stable configuration with one on top of the other. GPT-4 can understand that, and it gets that, and it can stack them up. Okay, put the laptop on the bottom because it has a wide base. Then put the cup upside down, and then put the bottle on top, right? Whereas GPT-3, so yeah, just put the cup, bottle, there's just 6 them on there, right? It's not nearly as good at that stuff.
So if you have that use case, Jason, if you have that use case, you upgrade today.
Well, I'm always impressed by what I get from it. Although I sometimes know, I noticed a few days ago when I gave it a task, and I realized that I could have explained it better. And so I provided the additional information, but then I could really see that it was very heavily weighting the new information. And it kind of forgot about some of the previous requirements.
One of the things, you can't just chain it all in, right? Because you sort of have to understand how it got to its answer, right? If it was just 3 dimensions instead of 1,500 or whatever it is, so you could see it starts off at a certain spot, right? And you give it a prompt, and that prompt ends up, let's say, in some vector space over here. Then you give it another, and it spits that out, whatever's there. And then you give it another one, and it ends up over here. Well, it's really going through each token, but and it spits it out. And then you say, no, you're wrong. It says, oh, sorry, and it tries to go back to the other one and tries to kind of correct, but it's not really it's not really right. So it kind of loses its place. What you can do instead is when you're prompting, go through, ask it the questions, get some stuff that it says. First thing is you really want to get some performance out of say, continue to ask questions until you fully understand the task.
Yeah.
Then that's when it asks the real good stuff. It's like, oh yeah, that's a real good question, right? That's when it does a really good job. Then you take all of those answers and you put them in more or less point form at the top again. and you run it again. And when it says, no, I think I got everything, it's pretty good, then you know you got a pretty decent primer prompt.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't given it complex problems like that. I did have a funny one yesterday. I asked it for the current date because somebody was making some claim about it, and I wanted to confirm. And it says I don't have access to real-time data, including the date. And it also mentioned, as of my last knowledge update in September 2021, I do not have access to real-time data, including date. So then I said, how long has it been since your last knowledge update? And it said my last knowledge update was in September 2021, and it has been around 1 year and 11 months since then.
Yeah.
So I said, wait a minute, you just said,
Yeah, isn't that funny, right?
How is this possible? And then it gave me just a BS answer. And I just called it out. I said, that doesn't make any sense. It's not possible for you to know how much time has elapsed unless you know the current time. So I basically proposed an explanation for it to see if it would agree with me that basically it has what would be equivalent to a subconscious understanding of what the current date is, because it's a computer and the date is there. And it basically agreed with me on that one. It said it's not part of its explicit knowledge base, but it does. It can provide estimations based on the internal clock.
Or it can do two other things with a paid account as well. Here, I'll show you quick. The first one's use functions. So I was going to, here, let me just do this, share. I was looking at going to that Reconnect Sydney last minute, and then I bailed. So I said, plan a trip to go to Reconnect Sydney. Okay, forget about this for now, right? I'm coming from Toronto and it's just me. The website is this. I will stay with a friend. He will lend me his car. So I say save. And I'm not sure which plugins I have enabled. So it's using a plugin now. It says unknown, so I don't know why that's unknown. It looks like one of the plugin vendors bailed or might be changed. But it will, in about 1 month, it will go to Kayak, because I do have Kayak as a plugin. I changed the plugins. You only have 3 active plugins. So it's using Kayak's API, finding out what's available in terms of flights. And so here's a couple flights and $1,600. Actually, it's probably not too bad, right? Round trip. So that's pretty decent, right? Would you like any other information? And it can use these plugins. If I go new, you can see how they're configured here. Plugins here. And it'll use the plugins to do whatever they can do. So I have one that inspects GitHub repos. And this one can surf websites. And this is Wolfram Alpha's plugin, Kayak, and so on. And you can go to all kinds of plugins. The plugins are just using the same function ability that they gave it not too long ago, but they work better. But that's really powerful if you have some kind of a news site or some kind of an API you want it to check. Or you can say, tell me the difference between the positioning of these 2 companies, and it'll scrape their 2 web pages and then compare them and write up some details. Like, I think I have WebPilot on here. Let me just check.
Okay, so it actually can connect to the internet.
With the plugins, yeah.
Oh,
So
I see. Sorry, yeah.
compare Delfs engineering.ca to what's your website?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Definedatabase.com.
Okay. Tell me the differences in these companies. Okay. So this is one of those things, right? So now it's come back and it's using this web pilot. So it's basically reading the data from that page. It's not recursing much, so you can see what it's doing. It's basically hitting this page. This is the API for that. And then when it comes back, it'll come back on the other side here and it'll show you what it pulled out of Delfs engineering.ca. Yeah. Content of website. Yeah. See, it doesn't seem to be taking a while, isn't it? It doesn't flake out on me. This is it, right? Oh, there it goes. So it's got an error occurred. No, it's got something here. But it didn't seem to work here. But just a second. And there's one other amazing feature, killer feature, right? So it's got here number of nature of the business divided Canadian corporation that specializes in creating bespoke software solutions. Do you have that name on your that word in
I'm
your
just
app?
trying to think if I do. I don't think so.
Right. Expertise, clearest partner, mastery over FileMaker, 5 to 5,000 employees, companies they've worked for. Right. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the stuff about Delfs engineering. Did I spell it wrong or something? I don't know. I should check that. Maybe there's something wrong with my other site. So that's kind of cool. Okay. Now check this one out. This one's even more powerful. This is a new one called Code Interpreter. And I want to do something. I want to, this one can handle big pieces of data. That's the difference. You can't only paste so much data in here. So, and it'll actually write code to parse that data. So I have a PDF that of a film script. I want to convert it. I want to convert it to JSON via OCR, and then I want to identify all the sets and scene names in it. Okay. OCD, no, OCR, OCR. And then, okay. Identify all. Now it's pretty good. I should tell it I'm a spaz with typing. Okay. That's all I've done so far. Okay. All right. Let's find the PDF. So let me go find the PDF.
By the way, your website doesn't redirect from if you don't have the www, it only works if you're on HTTP, not
Oh, I should see what's going on there. April format guide. Come on, where's the, I just want to find one. I did download it, did I?
You're going to be helping to put Hollywood out of business here.
Oh my gosh.
They're
I'm not gonna
struggling.
do any. Save as .pdf. I just don't see it here. Save. Better call. Yeah, done. Let's show it. Okay, there we go. All right. Yeah, I know. I'm not gonna be doing anything, putting anybody out of business but myself. All right, here we go. So drop this on, okay? Now, what this code interpreter does, given that I've received a first I'm going to convert it into images. After that, I'll use OCR.
Okay.
Okay, let me open this up. It wrote some Python, imported a library to do this task because it can't do it normally.
To do the OCR?
All right, first, yeah, and convert from path, images convert from path, results 51. The PDF has been successfully converted into 51 images. Now I'll use OCR. So it's going to run another little micro function, if you will.
Okay.
All right, close this here. And now it's writing the code. Now this would take us all weekend to code. All right? Like it's just doing it as a casual task. It spun up a little bucket, like a little code pen, ran it, right? And then it returns the number of pages. And that's all the code that you need to do this task. And now it's doing this one and it wrote some code in here. Combine all the pages, joins, all right? And return sample text. It looks like it's taking the first 1,000 characters. It's not taking the whole thing.
Oh, no.
And wait till it's done. It's still running. All right, PDF is exactly converted. Okay, yeah, it's still running. So give it a second to finish. Yes, it is 51 pages that it's doing OCR on. And hopefully it doesn't flake out on me.
So hopefully it does a good job. I use, by the way, PDF Pen Pro for this.
I apologize, Anna. The OCR took longer than expected. To make it more efficient, I'll break the task. Look at this. It timed out. So it knew it timed out. So it says, I'm going to break it into the first 10 pages at a time.
Okay.
And it's trying it again. But it's only going to take 10 pages. And sometimes if it throws errors, it'll rewrite the code. It says, oh, it looks like it wrote an error in the code. Right? Because it can analyze better than it can write. So it can debug. And once this is done, it'll go on to the next task. This might be a little bit big PDF or something. I don't know. Or maybe there's a bug in the code. Maybe it'll realize there's a bug in the code. I'm not sure. Oh, image 1 in 10, images 1 in 10. Yeah. See if this works. But anyhow, I've done this before with a smaller script. And then it wrote a state machine to parse through all of the code to figure out what was what inside that code. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's definitely impressive. I would just say that I'm pretty sure that ChatGPT cannot do anything that involves intuition.
What's intuition, though?
Well, there's a good question right there. I think that intuition is something that is separate and different than, analytical type thought. It's like inspiration. You go out for a walk on a beach and an idea comes to you. By the way, just a complete sidebar. For people who like mathematics, there's a really, really good movie about this Indian mathematician. Title of the movie is The Man Who Knew Infinity, about this.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know the movie?
No, but it sounds like I've seen a preview, I think.
It's Jeremy Irons and the guy who was in Slumdog Millionaire. And it's a true story. This was a guy from India who, came he had no formal education in mathematics. And it was all mathematics that is like way, nothing that I've ever looked at, combinatory theories, primes and, all kinds of like super duper, pretty abstract stuff. But apparently without any training, he just had like amazing proofs. And then I looked him up in Google and it's like, this guy really lived. He traveled to India, worked collaboratively with one of the great mathematicians there at Trinity College. I watched it twice.
So-
It's a really good
Oh,
movie.
yeah. So it finished up the first one. Well, it took down to 3 pages and then it finished. Now it's doing this next one, which is a text, getting the text from the 3 pages. And it was successful. So to expedite this process, continue extracting from the remaining pages in small chunks. So now it's going back to the first pages.
Well,
And
can I
it's
just say it should have, rather than tackling 50 and crashing, it should have just done 1 page at a time.
Well, it doesn't know. It tried what a human would do.
I'm just saying.
Try 10,
Just
right?
saying.
So,
I would give it a prompt. Say, hey, ChatGPT, what are you trying 50 pages?
No, it's trying to do that. It doesn't know it's going to be memory overflow. It's going to be processing power, what it takes, right? So,
I would have
at
done
any rate,
one.
it's doing it. And
Very impressive.
so, it's breaking it down. And it's going to grab each one of these chunks. And then when it's done, it's going to convert it all. And
Jam
it's
them together.
it's crazy. Crazy.
Yeah.
And this ability, these kinds of things this is going to become like, we're not like this code. It wrote the code and ran the code in it provisioned the space to run the code.
Well, my understanding, in terms of the code that it's referencing, I'm pretty sure that the code that it's quote unquote writing is code that exists on the internet for particular.
No, not verbatim. It's not. No, it's the nuances of that. It's not a repeat. Like this doesn't code. You can search this, won't be, this string
All
won't
right, so
exist.
you're saying it's unique. Still, it's tapping into pre-existing Python libraries. I mean, it's not writing
No,
Python.
it's not. It's looking at things like tons of Stack Overflow.
Okay.
And because it's been trained on that, it's taking a guess at what the next bit of code would be.
Okay.
So for example, if I wrote, the way these things kind of work is like, if I say, you complete my sentence, if I say 2, 4, 6, you're going to say 8.
Who do we appreciate?
Right? Yeah. But you might say 10, 12. Okay. So there's the probability of saying who and the probability of saying 10, 12 are maybe about the same. Right. So to the deterministic, one's going to be a little bit higher. So you might say we're going to pick the who do we appreciate, or you might know the context. If I say rah, 2, 4, 6, 8, then you can almost guarantee that it's going to be who do we appreciate.
Well, from the looks of it, I mean, it's impressive. I would just say it seems that the use cases that I see for this, you mentioned one earlier, it's, write me a first draft letter for a particular business correspondence. And then it's going to write that. And then if it was me, I would read it and attempt to personalize it such that it's in my own voice rather than a generic internet voice.
Yeah, but you can do that though. That's the whole
No,
thing.
I'm just saying I'm not using ChatGPT. I'm using a correspondence generation system. I'm using code generation in FileMaker, based off the underlying XML. I'm aware of ChatGPT. I'll probably tomorrow I'll hey, send me.
Well, this is actually interesting. Let's see what it can do. Let's check this out. What happened to my screen here? Check this out. I'm going to take it's a helper file here. I'm going to take a file that will have some FileMaker XML. Just a second here.
By the way, Eric, are you there? Eric Matthews?
Yes, I'm here.
Are we still being recorded?
Yeah, maybe we'd be good time.
Still being recorded.
Yeah. No, I'm just asking.
Probably be a good time to
Could you
stop.
turn off before I ask Charles a question about free energy?
Oh,